Though Raya's outward expression was calm, his eyes couldn't help but narrow by a margin. The carefree laughter was most definitely from someone deep within the connecting heaven realm. If things went poorly, Ryu could only run. The valiant figure streaked through the skies, landing right before the carnage caused by Ryu and clicking his tongue. Without hesitation, Ryu ordered his corpse puppets to retreat. The inconvenience of spatial rings was that an object couldn't enter its space without physical touch and could only take items out the very same way they were put in. This was why the inner space of Ryu's pupils added so much flexibility. Unfortunately, Ryu's cultivation was still too low to bring so many human-sized objects into his inner space at once, and even if he could, he wouldn't dare to expose the fact he had heavenly pupils here. After all, he was no longer the scion of the Tatsuya clan. His actions obviously signaled that his corpse puppets stood no chance against this valiant man. Since this was the case, there was no point in sacrificing them. Still, Ryu was surprised that the mysterious man did nothing, as his corpse puppets touched his hand one after another, forming an organized line. Smart, the man chuckled, though inexperienced. Smart in that you know not to waste my time, but inexperienced in that if you were so confident in your skills, why bring out 30 when you only needed 5? If I was a worse man, I wouldn't mind ruining your day by destroying every single one of these corpse puppets. Odd, the man spoke to himself. To be so skilled yet also so foolish. It's almost like you've never witnessed your full strength before. But if that's the case, how could you be so strong? Ryu's eyes narrowed further. His analysis was spot on. Ryu didn't have an accurate gauge of how strong his necromancy skills were, as he spent most of his time refining his control over one corpse puppet. To be on the safe side, he brought out all 30 in his arsenal, not knowing he would only need 5. Though he was confident in his abilities, he never overestimated himself. And to tame a bloodied steed with so little effort, those bestial meatheads must be spitting up blood. Ryu's eyebrows couldn't help but arch in confusion. Spitting up blood, why? Weren't they using this beast to pull a carriage? They clearly didn't care much about it. Seeing Ryu's reaction, even through his mask, the man shook his head. Definitely inexperienced. Do you think you're the only one who knows the value of this steed? The bestial clan was slowly tempering down its arrogance by having it pull their young master's carriage. It's a slow method, but if given enough time, it's effective, making unbridled beasts much easier to control moving forward. What an odd young man. You clearly displayed top-tier beast master capabilities, yet you don't know anything about such a method. The sharp eyes of the valiant man were slowly making Ryu more and more uncomfortable. In his last life, it was rare for anyone to see through Ryu despite his weakness. The reason was that he was always well informed in his endeavors. However, it seemed he was making more and more mistakes lately. Whoever this man was, he was very close to touching upon his secrets. Wearing golden robes, the man was like a bright sun, attempting to weed out any shadows where Ryu's secrets might hide. Ryu hadn't said a word from start to finish, yet he had already seen through too much. This is no good. The man strode forward, instantly covering several dozen meters to pick up Tharon's limp body. Who knows whether the young master lost consciousness due to Ryu's beating, or his own embarrassment. Dusting Tharon off, the golden-robed man threw him over his shoulder, casually carrying him. He didn't seem to care about Ryu's opinion. In fact, most thought that there was no need for him to. He was a connecting heaven realm expert. Why did he need to ask a Kai refinement pup his opinion? Unfortunately, that was when Ryu spoke his first words. Leave his spatial ring. The man paused as the atmosphere seemed to freeze over. Those watching were stunned. He actually dared to say something in this situation. What did you say? The man's soft, carefree eyes sharpened. I said, leave his spatial ring. The bloodied steed neighed, its hooves stamping into the ground. Normal beasts would be instantly suppressed by a stronger aura. Though beasts were innately born with stronger constitutions than humans, many of them were cowardly. This was a large part of why many of the strongest realms were ruled by humans, especially after the ancestral beast era came to an end. But the bloodied steed was different. To it, it didn't matter how strong the opponent was. Even if it had to die, it would die fighting valiantly. Having such a personality, it quite liked this new master of his. In this way, it was exactly like the ancestral beasts of the past. Ryu was instantly suppressed by the golden-robed man's aura, but his back sat as straight as ever. "You didn't bother to ask what led to this altercation," Ryu said coldly. "He crossed a line. Leaving him with his life is already my limit, and I happen to be in some need of funds. Being a necromancer is quite an expensive endeavor." Captain Zhu, who had been shivering with his head lowered since the golden-robed man appeared, raised his head once more, a faint light of hope in his eyes. If this brat spoke any more brazenly, the man would definitely kill him. Maybe then he'd be able to get off with a lighter punishment. "Do you want to die?" The man's aura rose. "Don't joke with me," Ryu said plainly. "Since you like deducing something from nothing so much, how about I try my hand at it? You're a connecting heaven realm expert, directly interfering in the matters of the younger generation. Yet, you aren't enraged at the sight of this fool's unconscious body. In addition, this place is widely known as Zhu clan territory. Yet your hair isn't white, nor are your eyes. Yet, despite the fact your surname is clearly not Zhu, no one has interfered with your presence here. Obviously, you are City Lord looming. For a City Lord to personally handle such miscellaneous matters, it's either you have too much time on your hands or you have need of me. So do you dare to kill me before you get what you need?" City Lord Loom's eyes narrowed. He found Ryu's actions more confusing than they'd ever been before. If he didn't know better, he'd think that this young man had a split personality, one of which was a dolt, while the other was sharp and intelligent. The inner ring had its own governmental system apart from the outer ring, but it wasn't drastically different. While in the outer ring, there were 9 major cities controlled by 3 fifth-order sects each. In the inner ring, there were dozens of major cities split amongst 5 half-step 6th-order clans. Though the inner ring technically covered a smaller area than the outer ring, it had much less wilderness around it, leading to this situation. In the end, though Looming City was Zhu clan territory, it was only so in name. The truth was the Looming City was a city built by the Loom clan, a powerful 5th-order clan in their own right. Unfortunately, they were forced to pay a certain tax toward the Zhu clan, which was why, in technical terms, they were controlled by them. Still, that beauty named Tay was correct. Had Tharon been a Zhu, City Lord Loom would have had no choice but to punish Ryu to the full extent of his abilities. After all, he still had to answer to the Zhu clan. But since he was a bestial, he had a certain amount of wiggle room. The issue was that, with Ryu's blatant exposing of this, the wiggle room he had was halved instantly. Who knew what kind of treasures Tharon had in his spatial ring? What if it was something the bestial clan absolutely wouldn't part with? And asking him to personally hand over the spatial ring was very different from him taking it himself. Despite knowing the position Ryu put the City Lord in, he sneered. "I'm not a fan of being blackmailed," City Lord Loom said coldly. "And I'm not a fan on those who believe themselves to be more powerful than me acting as they please. That fool had nothing to do with you, yet you insisted on crossing so far to pick him up. And for what? To display your dominance. You brought this on yourself." The atmosphere became more and more difficult to breathe in. This young man was really unwilling to take even a single step back. In fact, he was pressing forward. Had he lost his mind? If he was so certain that the City Lord needed him, then all he had to do was play it cool. Plus, Tharon was unconscious. If Ryu just followed the City Lord, it wouldn't be impossible to ask for the spatial ring in secret. Why did he have to do it public like this? There was little those of the City Lord's stature wanted to protect more than their image. Such a thing was directly tied to the faith and their future path. Even if the City Lord wanted to make use of Ryu before, how could he still do so now? Some believed that maybe Ryu was acting this way because he had some sort of backing. In fact, his talent and young age, not to mention his display of wealth in taking out 30 corpse puppets, convinced some of this already. It was only Ailsa who facepalmed continuously. It was only she who knew that Ryu didn't have some grand plan nor backing. He really was just pissed off. No matter how often he reminded himself that he was no longer the scion of the Tatsuya clan, he found it difficult to remain quiet in the face of clear disrespect. To Ryu, the city lord's actions in taking Thar on, without asking him first, was nothing short of a slap to the face. Who was he to save his, Ryu Tatsuya's enemy from his fate? How dare he? Those who watched on could tell that Ryu was truly enraged. Though it wasn't true, his momentum even gave the illusion of matching the city lord's aura. Suddenly, the city lord's aura completely dissipated as he shook his head. Inexperienced, far too inexperienced, he casually swatted his palm downward. Before Ryu could react, a monumental pressure descended from the skies, crashing down into him and the bloodied steed he sat upon. Though the poor beast tried to maintain its upright posture, its strong legs inevitably buckled, sending Ryu sprawling to the ground. Ryu pushed off to land on his 2 feet, but his back was bent so far forward that his forehead practically touched the ground. Anyone watching could tell that he was straining himself to the limits in order to avoid kneeling at all costs. He coughed violently, blood flying from his lips. Heh, Ryu chuckled, his eyes able to see nothing but the ground. A strong restrict kai bound him, pulling him forward against his will and away from the bloodied steed. Tay frowned at this scene. What was it that made the city lord so confident that Ryu had nothing to rely on? Did she miss something? She knew that the city lord wasn't a fool, and considering the current tense political climate, there was no way he would take the risk of offending a big character. There were only 2 possible explanations. Either the Loom clan had become desperate enough to take the risk, or she was too inexperienced and this Ryu had nothing to rely upon. Could it be possible for a genius so young to? Suddenly Tay's pupils constricted, realizing that she had forgotten an extremely important detail while she was analyzing Ryu's talent. He had no inherited name. What was it that they heard Tharon yell? He had called this Ryu a nameless bastard. No, that was it. There was no chance that someone from a big clan would ever claim to be nameless. Ryu's knees bent, trembling under the pressure, though his eyes reflected the fiery pits of hell, because his forehead was nearly touching the ground. Not a soul could see them. Maybe if they had. No, maybe if City Lord Loom had, he would have realized that saving his face wasn't worth it. City Lord Loom looked down at Ryu's awkwardly bent body, his expression carefree once more. He shook his head. This child was so prideful. But did he think others didn't have the right to their own pride as well? Sometimes one had to know when to lower their head. His hand waved again, sending Ryu's body to the excited Captain Zhu. But hearing the city lord's next words, that excitement was doused instantly. Throw him in a cell. But his eyes sharpened. Be sure to follow proper protocol and don't dare bend the rules again, or I'll have your head. Bonus chapter for another 50 golden ticket milestone. It feels like I should increase this. Not sign, not sign. Chains rattled as Ryu was pulled along. He felt that all his strength had been locked. His kai couldn't move as it pleased. There was a barrier stopping him from communicating with his mental realm, and even his blood had slowed to a crawl, blocking him from accessing more than 9/10 of his bodily strength. Though Captain Zhu feared City Lord Loom far too much to ignore his words, the sneer on his face only grew fiercer as he dragged Ryu along at a pace he knew the seals on his body wouldn't allow. In the end, he was still a member of the Zhu clan. As long as he didn't go too far, the City Lord wouldn't dare to arbitrarily end his life. In the end, the City Lord knew this, which was why, though he warned Captain Zhu to not go overboard, he didn't make any remarks about treating Ryu well. The City Lord felt that Ryu's arrogance needed to be tempered down, so other than protecting his life, he didn't bother with anything else. So like this, Ryu had gone from sitting tall upon the back of a bloodied steed to being dragged through the streets of Looming City. Many couldn't help but shake their heads. In truth, their evaluation of City Lord Loom raised by several levels. Contrary to one might expect, his reputation rose instead of falling. There simply weren't many of his stature who would still preserve this young man's life after Ryu's words and actions. As for their thoughts of Ryu, How could there be anything other than disdain? Even those who normally didn't look down on individuals couldn't help but feel disgust toward him. In the martial world, everything was placed within a strict hierarchy, no matter how talented you were. There was no guarantee you'd reach the heights of the seniors above you. This is why youths must remain humble. Even with Ryu's level of talent, his great-grandfather hardly blinked. Had he known that Ryu was thinking of revenge against him, maybe his expressionless visage would have cracked to reveal an uncontrollable laughter. Even if Ryu's talent was directly doubled, there was still no guarantee he would reach even the World C realm, let alone becoming a sky god capable of matching him. This was how experts thought. Cultivation required too much luck, too much good fortune, and too much coincidence. The amount of each needed, when you didn't have a backer, was multiplied several times over. Who did this nameless child think he was? Beating his chest before the city lord as a mere Kai refinement realm expert. In the carriage of beauties, Aria giggled, causing Tay to frown. What exactly are you laughing at? You don't find this funny, little Tay. I find it hilarious. Swinging her ample bosom, Aria emphasized the word little. Plus, he disrespected your grandfather just now. You should be laughing more than me. Even Mao couldn't help but giggle a bit. That was right. The seemingly young city lord was already a grandfather of such a mature young lady. This was the world of cultivation. What is there to laugh about? Tay said, unamused. At the end of the day, wasn't he correct? Grandfather Loom didn't dare to kill him. Mao and Aria looked at each other, finding Tay's words reasonable. But in the end, they still laughed. So what if her words were reasonable? At best, he'd just end up being a puppet to fulfill the city lord's wishes. And even after that, he might just die anyway. Maybe if he had been more reasonable, with the city lord's gentle and easygoing personality, he would have been allowed to live. But why would the city lord allow such a talent to go back into the wild? Even if there was no guarantee that Ryu would reach his level, there was no denying that it would be easier for him than most others. Since clearing this potential problem would be as easy as swatting a bug for him, why not do it? Aria wiped the tears from her eyes. Since you want to know why I'm laughing so much, I don't mind telling you. Don't you think he looks quite like a bloodied steed right now? Tay's frown only deepened, instantly understanding Aria's words. How ironic. Just a moment ago, Great Uncle Loom was explaining the Bastille clan's method of tempering down the arrogance of their beasts, and now he's using the same tactics on another beast. I find this to be funnier than anything else. Aria's giggling rippled through her lithe body. Luckily, there were no men in the carriage, or else they'd lose face before such a sight. Seeing that Tay was quickly losing patience with Aria, Mao, who had been giggling as well, stepped forward to mediate the situation, unsure why Tay was willing to get so angry for a complete stranger. It wasn't like they could even see much of his face anyway. They could only faintly tell that he was kind of young. The rest was obscured by the mask's Kai field. Why do you two think that city lord needs him for? Tay and Aria paused their squabble. They too were curious. He might want this Ryu to represent him. After all, there are rumors that the Zhu clan has been preparing to move to the center region. By then, the balance of the inner ring will shift once more. If Grandfather Loom could break the final barrier to become an immortal ring expert, our clan would no longer lose out to those other 4 clans. If he can get that item, he might have the necessary confidence to do so. He wants to rely on an outsider for such a thing, Mao said with a frown. A complicated look flashed within Tay's eyes before disappearing as quickly as it appeared. Aria sneered. The best mainline talent of our Loom clan is none other than little Miss Tay. But the clan can't be inherited by a woman, nor can it be represented by one. My brother would be a good option, but it seems Great Uncle Loom would prefer an outsider rather than giving his own family too much power. Tay's eyes sharpened. That enough? Mao felt another headache coming on. She wondered why she even bothered. At least when she was pretending to be dumb, Aria would point her viper tongue toward her. Asterisk asterisk, where is your spatial ring? Captain Zhu raged, losing his control, palming Ryu in the chest and into the wall of the dark cell. He couldn't believe it. He had been with Ryu the whole time, so why weren't his treasures on him? And why couldn't he remove his mask? Blood flew Ryu's lips, but he remained silent, his gaze trained toward the damp, molded stone ground. Knowing that he couldn't go any further without earning City Lord Loom's rage, Captain Grit hit teeth and spit onto the ground of the dirty, dark cell. Hearing the scurrying rats, the rage in his heart was dampened a bit, his lips curling into a sneer. Enjoy your stay, these very well might be the last moments of your life. With a harumph, he slammed the cell doors shut. Even though the City Lord had already sealed much of Ryu's strength, the captain had still chosen to throw him into the cell with the sturdiest formations. Even a divine vessel realm expert wouldn't be able to casually leave, not without alerting the whole of Looming City, that is. Ryu emotionlessly gazed at the metal bars before him. It was quite easy for him to tell that they were made of black-grade material. It was hard to imagine why this city would have such top-grade prisons, but on second thought, it made sense. With how many experts frequented this place, if Looming City didn't have a way to threaten and lock them away, they would be too useless as a major city. That said, these matters were the furthest thing from Ryu's mind. What did he care what cell he was thrown into? The fact he was thrown into one at all was something he had never experienced before. In his first life, no one dared to look down on him. At first, it was because of the Tatsuya clan at his back, but not long later, that respect became rooted in his own ability. In his second life, he had faced hardship, but after his memories returned to him, he wiped them away without a second thought. He didn't even consider for a moment that those matters really happened to him. If it was up to Ryu, the youthful him of this life was another person entirely that he happened to take over the body of. One might think that this bone-deep pride was birthed with Ryu due to his upbringing. Maybe he thought too much of himself because of the family he came from. But Ryu might be the only person who knew that his arrogance had little to do with his Tatsuya clan. His clan just allowed him to be more of who he already was. Ailsa sat quietly on Ryu's shoulder. It wasn't that she was unwilling to speak, but just that she didn't believe anything she said would make an impact. In his first life, despite having the love of his life by his side for hundreds of years, he didn't dare to take her for himself. It wasn't until he believed he might never see her again that he finally granted her wish. It was a matter that was selfish beyond belief. Ryu knew that maybe a better man wouldn't have made that decision, and maybe, deep down, he didn't believe in his ability to come back as much as he said. The character he projects to the outside one is of cold confidence, but it hides something far weaker and far more fragile. Arrogance has always been his escape, not his dogma. Ailsa felt the memories of a young Ryu floating in her mind, that boy with a bright smile that lit up the Tatsuya clan. After he entered that library, he was never the same again. His brightness was replaced with a harsh winter, his smile by an expressionless gaze, his true self buried deep within a layer of animosity. And even through all this, he didn't believe he had the right to feel these emotions. He was born with 2 loving parents, 4 loving grandparents. He had the world's resources at his fingertips, and a woman who loved him with all her heart by his side. He felt he didn't have the right to be bitter, to hate the world. So, he buried it. Seeing so deeply into Ryu's mind for the first time, Ailsa felt her heart shudder. To think she said those things to him. How could a man with such thoughts not understand how lucky he was? How many things had she said about fate not being so easy to change? Who was it that understood more about such a thing? Was it her, the girl who ran away from home, or was it him, the man willing to kill himself for a small sliver of a chance to change his family's destiny? Ailsa suddenly felt ashamed. Did she really have 9 cycle of 100 million years of experience over Ryu? Hadn't she spent all of that time in the crystal coffin, burying her consciousness into a deep slumber? What maturity did that gain her? Exactly. She knew that she was only capable of seeing so deeply into Ryu's psyche, because despite his calm exterior, his emotions were fluctuating wildly. A portion of him wanted to slaughter everything in sight. Another wanted to humiliate City Lord Loom until he couldn't raise his head. Another wanted to leave this prison and never come back. What did a minor? Humiliation at the hands of a mere city lord mean to him? His family was still waiting. These so-called restrictions on his cultivation. A mere connecting heaven realm expert wanted to restrict 4 ancestral bloodlines, to seal chaotic silk meridians, to cut off a mental realm bathed in lightning. He overestimated himself. Ryu felt the rage flames he had tempered down earlier flaring up once more. Who was right and who was wrong? It was certain that this city lord still believed himself to be correct. But he set rules for his city that he allowed to be broken simply by virtue of one's status. Was such a person worthy of Ryu's respect? He seemed to be an amicable leader, but he treated those weaker than him with a subconscious disdain. Was such a person worth of his respect? He couldn't break into the immortal ring realm on his own, so he needed Ryu's help. Is such a person worthy of my respect? The formations of the cell formlessly shattered, but Ryu didn't move a single inch. He remained seated, his boiling blood slowing to a crawl. The intent was so powerful that Ailsa felt her mind tremble, her consciousness blackening for a moment, before it regained its calm. But even after all that, the beating of her heart refused to. The natural order was split into 2 main categories: mortal endowments and natural enlightenments. Though these two were placed side by side, the reality was that someone who had comprehended a natural enlightenment, even to the lowest state of listening realm, touched upon a strength others couldn't imagine. So, why was it that Ailsa felt Ryu had grazed a barrier even most world sea monsters like his grandparents would never touch in their lifetimes? Unfortunately, the feeling disappeared. Ryu had already sent his mind into the crystalline jade. The old man dressed in gray robes felt his eyes sharpen when Ryu appeared. After reaching the peak Kai refinement realm, Ryu was no longer stuck at the second trial of the spiritual severing realm. According to what the old man first told him, the 4th floor was separated by each of the cultivation realms, starting at the spiritual severing realm. Each had 9 trials where he faced a battle spirit, and a 10th where he battled himself. Technically, the 4th floor shouldn't be much help in comprehending Earth-grade techniques until one entered the Divine Vessel trials, but thanks to Ryu's origin flame and innate comprehension abilities, he estimated that reaching the 5th spiritual severing trial would be enough to finally gain a real grasp of the Earth-grade techniques he had chosen. Right now, Ryu was already on the 7th trial. He had already died here countless times, even with his peak Kai refinement realm cultivation. However, there was something boiling in him right now. Though Ryu was exceptionally hard on himself, the old man felt shocked whenever he returned. The trials were organized such that the 1st and 2nd corresponded to lower spiritual severing realm cultivation, the 3rd and 4th to middle, the 5th and 6th to higher, the 7th and 8th to peak, and the 9th to half-step divine vessel realm cultivation before one finally battled themselves at the 10th. Ryu was crossing a large barrier of cultivation and 3 small ones. It was so ridiculous the old man felt like fainting. The worst part of it all was the experts of the Zhu clan were completely unlike normal day-to-day experts. These battle spirits represented what the best of the best had to offer. It was no wonder why, despite his half-step divine vessel realm cultivation, Tharon was beaten like a dog by Ryu. The old gray-robed man sighed. "What have you come to train in today?" Without a single word, Ryu took out a single spear, his momentum growing. Just one spear. The old man blinked in confusion. He had never seen Ryu not dual-wield, so why was he suddenly using only one spear? In the end, he smiled. "This is good. I've tried to tell you that dual-wielding such weapons was too ridiculous of an endeavor to undertake." He wanted to speak more, but his pupils suddenly constricted into pinholes. A shimmering birthed phenomena appeared to Ryu's back, a magnificent god-emperor, exuding the aura of the ruler of a nation. "Our Zhu clan doesn't have such a deep spear legacy." "Just who are you?" He suddenly realized that Ryu had never once shown him his true strength. Ryu cared little for how many times he died, nor was he intent on showing off. His arrogance had nothing to do with caring for the opinions of others, and everything to do with his value for himself. If it wasn't because he felt his bottleneck loosen, this gray-robed old man would never find out his true strength. I apologize, but the 7th trial isn't enough to help me break through. I need the 10th. I will be back to repeat the 7th once my goal is accomplished, Ryu said without much emotion. White serpents dance, lurking shadow. A strike with beauty beyond words pierced toward the old man. At its forefront, a gorgeous snake with light ruby eyes and beautiful white scales manifested. But its true danger was the intent hidden beneath it, a shadow of shrouded killing intent. Potent, fierce, undefeatable. Copy, he named it Lines of Fate when Ryu copied White Serpent's dance. What he was actually doing was comprehending the karmic strings that formed this technique down to its absolute base. Essentially, in an instant, Ryu had perfectly comprehended this mystical grade technique to the circle of perfection. In fact, it was a small bit beyond that, because he comprehended the essence of what its creator tried to portray. However, these matters weren't so simple. In order to copy something he saw, Ryu had to have enough lines of fate connecting him and the technique. The reason he could instantly comprehend White Serpent's dance was precisely because the Awoken Moon sect was his Tatsuya clan's subordinate sect. Their fate couldn't have been more tied to his own. If Ryu came across a random cultivator and attempted to use lines of fate to copy one of their techniques, he would at most comprehend a small percentage of it. Though if he fought this person for a long time, this small percentage would slowly increase. If their battle became famous, their fate ties would grow stronger, and Ryu would thereby be able to comprehend even more. The only unfortunate part was that Ryu obviously couldn't display the true strength of a mystical grade technique that could only be used by Dao, pedestal, and cosmic seed realm experts. Therefore, of its strikes, he could only display the first lurking shadow, but this alone was enough. It alone was comparable to a lower Earth grade technique, using it at its full strength, without the restrictions Ryu placed on it so that he could use it. It wouldn't lose to a middle heaven grade technique. In just a single strike, the old gray-robed man fell. Though he lasted longer in the 8th trial, he fell just the same. In the 9th, Ryu directly took out his halberd, letting his pent-up rage flames burn, releasing his anger all at once. The old man didn't even survive the build-up of his attack, let alone its actual strike. Finally, Ryu stood face to face with himself. In truth, though this trial might be difficult for others, it was easy for Ryu. Reason being that this trial had no way of replicating his northern heavenly wind, his origin flame, or his heavenly pupils. Still, Ryu hadn't come here to just win. He cared little for such things. He came here to break his bottleneck. He had been stuck as a Tatsuya, saintly weapon heir for too long. It was time he entered the imposed realm and became a lord. If he succeeded, he would make even divine vessel realm experts bow to him. Two pairs of cold silver eyes met. Neither spoke superfluous words. Taking out his spear, Ryu did away with thought of using his heavenly pupils. He would battle to his heart's content. To his back, the god emperor slowly grew more corporeal. The clash of the two Ryas immediately grew heated. When Ryu used a spear, his shadow used a spear. When he used a glaive, his shadow used a glaive. When he used a halberd, his shadow used a halberd. The changes to Ryu's battle style were swift and seamless. At times his attacks would be sharp and clever. At others they would be commanding and overbearing and still. Yet they could be without obstruction and fierce. With each exchange, the bottleneck loosened further and further. Ryu remembered with absolute clarity that the moment his basic stances reached the lower small success stage, it was that very moment he became an heir. However, this small success moniker was by the standards of his father's image in his memories, by the standards of someone just beginning to cultivation. He was well beyond the circle of perfection. To now, Ryu's basic stances had remained at the lower small success stage, creeping forward ever so slowly. This could only be expected. His father was a Dao pedestal realm cultivator. How could he replicate his image any better in such a short time? As far as Ryu knew, his father had already formed his dominion and was only a half step away from forming his divinity in the Tatsuya, saintly weapons, Ryu couldn't even imagine wielding that kind of strength. The fact he had reached the small success stage already was shocking enough. Within the dark cell, a violent pressure began to flow outward from Ryu's body, but Ailsa worked quickly to shift the Kai into the ethereal realm, making it impossible to sense even for immortal ring realm experts. She sucked in a cold breath, just a step away from the impose realm. There was only a single barrier between the world of an inheritor and the world of a lord, but it could only be described as the difference between heaven and earth. Within the category of mortal endowments, there were 7 realms, each more powerful than the last. But unlike cultivation technique grades, improving one's cultivation didn't necessarily mean that one could take the next step forward. When one breaks from the pulse opening realm, you would naturally graduate to black grade techniques. When one breaks from the spiritual severing realm, you would naturally graduate to earth grade techniques. However, in the martial world, there were no shortage of connecting heaven realm experts who could only be inheritors, while geniuses like Ryu existed that could become a lord before even stepping into the 4th order. Ryu's body trembled, a flood of essence flowing into his body like a raging tide and washing over even as his deeply buried marrow. The wave didn't cease at one. Just an hour later, there was a second, and just 6 hours after that, there was a third. Like the push and pull of a perfectly balanced system of counters, Ryu's path stretched equally in 3 directions. In one, there was the scholarly god emperor; in the other, there was the imposing war god; and finally, like a beast roaring from the mountain tops, there was the mighty dragon god. A steamy breath left Ryu's lips. The scolding fog singed the metal bars before him, causing them to give off a red-orange glow. But Ryu didn't leave the crystalline jade. Completely immersed in his own world, he trained like a madman. It was only Ailsa, who was by his side every waking minute, who knew that the city lord wasn't worthy of causing such a change in Ryu. He trained like this every day. His dragon god inheritance is agitating his fire dragon bloodline. It's no wonder his rage flames awakened, despite his fire dragon bloodline not having been provided enough vital Kai. Essence was the highest form of energy in existence. Just like neutral Kai, it was compatible with everything. The issue now was that essence, under the guidance of Ryu's comprehension of his halberd inheritance, was becoming the vital Kai his fire dragon bloodline needed. This would be a great thing in any other situation, but Ryu was current in prison, having just angered a connecting heaven realm expert. But now, just his latent breath alone was a few ticks away from melting black-grade metals. If this continued, Ryu's situation wouldn't become better, it would become worse. If this city lord found out Ryu had such an overbearing bloodline, who knows what he'd do? Ailsa took a deep breath. This life partner of hers really makes others worry. She concentrated to her best ability, slowly siphoning away the monstrous heat into the ethereal realm. Slowly but surely, the cell temperature returned to normal, but Ryu's body heat didn't lessen, instead it grew. The essence continued to fuel his fire dragon bloodline, forcing its strength upward by massive increments of 10,000 jin. In the blink of an eye, it surpassed his lightning killing bloodline, soaring past 50,000 jin, past 100,000 jin, before violently slamming into a barrier it couldn't cross as 170,000 jin. Ailsa sighed. It's just as I thought. The limit of strength of his fire dragon bloodline should be 200,000 jin, but he lost some of its strength due to it sharing a body with 3 other bloodlines. In the end, though, it only lost 30,000 jin. In the end, the latent fire-type vital Kai spilled over into Ryu's fire phoenix bloodline. The essence only finally slowed to a crawl after his fire phoenix bloodline reached 31,600 jin of strength. It seemed the 30,000 Ryu lost out on was replenished elsewhere. It had only been 3 days, but the gains were unimaginable. The crackling of Ryu's bones was so fierce that they would have resounded through the whole of Looming City had it not been for Ailsa. Ryu's presence alone had become so overbearing that the air almost seemed to solidify around him, not daring to move. His total strength had reached 256,600 jin, the equivalent of a cultivator with a single ancestral bloodline, opening all of their body vessels before continuing to fill their blood with vital chi to about 25%. In simple terms, the strength of a half-step connection heaven realm expert was 1 million jin for someone with this caliber of bloodline, and though he wasn't quite there yet, Ryu's strength could already be considering to be of the middle divine vessel realm in bodily strength. Ailsa shuddered. So this is the strength of having 4 ancestral bloodline, even with them losing power while balancing and restricting each other. This is too much. Soon she calmed down. If it wasn't for Ryu reaching the imposing realm, this could have never happened. Unfortunately, Ailsa didn't get the chance to rest, because the unassuming black glove of order began to greedily evolve under Ryu's new comprehension. Still, as she was working to contain yet another phenomenon, Ailsa couldn't help but wonder if Ryu comprehended an ice and lightning inheritance to the imposed realm as well. Wouldn't he gain the strength of a connecting heaven realm expert in one swoop? In the end, she shook her head and focused. It took Ryu 4 years, despite his talent and diligence, to reach the imposed realm in his Tatsuya, saintly weapons. But, even as she thought this, Ailsa suddenly remembered something else. The Tatsuya saintly weapons were birthed phenomena, but Ryu's ice and lightning inheritance were hidden within his veins. Wouldn't comprehending the latter be easier? Months ticked by, but not only did Ryu not speak a single word, he didn't move a single inch. He sat without a care in the world, diligently cultivating day after day. Technically speaking, the Seal City Lord Loom placed on him would slow his cultivation down tremendously. At first, Ryu wanted to leave them so that this city lord wouldn't be aware of his true abilities, but the massive awakening of his fire dragon bloodline shattered this thought. Because it was so overbearing, all foreign energies in his body were shattered. This also meant that the lingering injuries from Edwin had also finally been dealt with. Luckily, the city lord only casually placed seals on him and wasn't a seal master. As a result, his restrictions weren't connected to him, so he was unaware that Ryu had already broken free of them. Ryu could have long since left the prison, but he chose to stay. First, he was curious about what this city lord needed from him. Second, he had a feeling he would soon be able to extort this city lord. And finally, the insult of several months ago wasn't one he was willing to swallow. Before he left, he would make sure this Loom clan felt his wrath. Though his body was in a cell, Ryu's mind was in a completely different world. The space was massive, as endless as the skies. Countless silver pillars stretched upward, their feet covered by beautiful white clouds. However, despite its beauty, this place was one Ryu had died countless times in. The third floor of the crystalline jade was the floor of natural order, and it truly did not disappoint Ryu. This place was the Wind Gate. After Ryu reached the imposed realm of his Tatsuya saintly weapons, he had been eager to do so with his northern heavenly wind. But the last few months reminded him just why it took him so long to comprehend it to the inheritor realm in the first place. Because he had the bloodline of 3 flying beasts, though Ryu didn't have the strongest wind affinity. It shouldn't be terrible either. Yet, it felt like reaching the imposed realm was an impossible task. According to Ailsa, this was because he only had the embryo of the northern wind. If he wanted the barrier to weaken, he would likely have to find superior winds to feed it. If he could find another embryo of the 4 directional winds, he could decide whether to keep them both, or to directly allow his northern heavenly wind to swallow it and become whole. Unfortunately, even a shrine-playing clan like the Wind Shrine clan treated this embryo like an impossible to find treasure, so Ryu would have to settle for the lesser option. Ryu remembered that his mother had fused her dual-wielding style with the Eastern wind of sharpness embryo. Over time, she managed to make it whole by swallowing lesser winds, so it wasn't completely impossible. Ryu's body lightly leapt from silver pillar to silver pillar. Though the skies seemed calm, the truth was that vicious winds were flying about constantly. Yet not only did his clothes hardly flap, his hair was deathly still. It was as though one's eyes were purposely lying to them. But the next instant proved the truth. Beads of sweat fell from Ryu's brow. The moment his concentration collapsed, a wind force seemed to come from nowhere, shredding his body into droplets of blood. A moment later, he appeared outside the gates, slightly pale-faced. He glared at the gates before sighing. He was still too far away. The wind gate changed depending on the path you were following. The northern heavenly wind was known as the wind of natural order, because only it grasped the true essence of wind. So, Ryu's trial was to be one with the wind. Winds upon the pillars increased slowly from hundreds of kilometers an hour to hundreds of thousands and beyond. To now, Ryu could only reach the 2,000 or so kilometer speed. Normally, this wouldn't be enough to kill him as someone with a divine vessel realm body, but the trial purposely made him fragile. If others heard that Ryu was unsatisfied, they might very well go all out with him. Reason being, Ryu looked down on his palm, only to find an overbearing flame dancing about. It seemed to breathe along with him, as though it was another limb. After awakening his fire dragon bloodline to the limits of the pulse-tempering realm of body cultivation, Ryu almost had no choice but to comprehend these flames. In fact, he hadn't done so consciously, but unconsciously. This flame was his rage flame, the very flame that made fire dragons the overlords of eras past. In this world, there were 33 flames of each grade. Ryu's rage flame was one of the 33 ancestral grade flames, so it only made sense it was so overbearing. It fed off emotions, not just the emotions of its wielder, but also the emotions of its wielder's enemies. It was able to gather the wrathful energy of a battlefield and strengthen itself for a period of time. If that was all, maybe it would be fine. But after awakening his rage flame, just 3 months later, Ryu entered the impose realm. This second rush of essence spilled over into his fire phoenix bloodline, causing it to reach the limits of the pulse-tempering realm as well, and Ryu's second palm opened, revealing a second flame. While the rage flame was a deep red to the point of almost being black, this flame was a gentle red gold. It was the ancestral grade rebirth flames. It was also known as the Nirvana flame by some. This flame allowed Ryu to be immune to ancestral grade flames of the same realm. As for lower grade flames, they were even more unable to harm him. For example, a sovereign grade flame, which was a step lower, would have to be of the monarch realm to harm him. As for common grade flames, they could forget it. Of course, this was only the simplest ability of the Nirvana flames. However, Ryu had comprehended his fire Tao deeply enough to awaken its other abilities. In all likelihood, he wouldn't until he formed his divinity like his father had. Still, these alone were just 2 of the changes he experienced in this near half-year. After reaching divine vessel equivalent strength with his body, his ice jade body began to exhibit some of its true abilities. In fact, it was this change that was the greatest reason why Ryu's injuries had healed so quickly. Before Ryu could think any further, he felt Ailsa urging him to wake. Someone was finally coming to see him after all these months. Bonus chapter for 500 Power Stones. Not long after Ryu awoke, he sensed the presence of 2 individuals. One was the very city lord loom that placed him in this cell, while the other was one of the beauties that sat within the white carriage from all those months ago. From the looks of it, they were kin. As for why City Lord Loom would bring her here, Ryu had no idea, nor did he care. Though he was awake, his eyes didn't open, nor did they so much as twitch. Ryu was thinking about other things. Namely, he was confused about his fire Tao. He had always thought he could only comprehend one path, which was why he didn't rush to comprehend a lightning legacy. However, somehow, he had both rage flames and rebirth flames, was eliciting a unique flame, different from comprehending an element. Elements were mortal endowments, and shared this category along with birthed phenomena. But why did things feel so weird? He hadn't even consciously comprehended these flames. They simply appeared on their own after his bloodlines reached a certain vital Kai saturation. Is this the true ability of my ice jade crystal body? To be able to perfectly balance numerous diverging paths at once? Ryu had felt his bone structure have a breakthrough after his body reached the divine vessel equivalent realm, but he couldn't seem to comprehend exactly what that change was. If his guess was right, maybe he didn't need to be so careful about choosing a path anymore. He knew his bone structure had 4 main abilities: accelerated healing, friend of nature, absolute balance, and ungodly cultivation speed. It seemed he had underestimated what it meant to have perfect balance. This was only just the beginning as well. Once he reached the divine vessel realm with his Kai, that was when the true doors would open. Unfortunately, Ryu's talents also had their limitations. Currently, Ryu was firmly within the half-step spiritual severing realm. However, he still felt he needed more accumulation to enter the realm completely. And the reason was hidden within the severing moniker of this realm. In order to become such an expert, one needed to form a Kai blade. This Kai blade would be used to sever the connection between your spiritual foundation and your meridians. Once this connection was reformed, it would become sturdier, making each successive severing more difficult. One might wonder what the issue was. Ryu's Kai density was already comparable to half-step divine vessel realm experts, so why couldn't he form his Kai blade already? In fact, he should be able to sweep the spiritual severing realm in a single sitting. No, the problem was that Ryu's meridians were made of chaotic silk, the third hardest material in existence. Even if the connection between his spiritual foundation and them was where they were the absolute thinnest, how could they be casually cut? This was the first roadblock Ryu had faced, and it was ironically because of his own overwhelming talent. If he couldn't find a way to solve this problem, he would be stuck in the Kai refinement realm forever. It was no wonder he couldn't be bothered to care about this city Lord Loom anymore. He had more pressing problems. The longer Ryu remained silent, the darker city Lord Loom's expression grew. He had thought that after just a few weeks, the sounds of Ryu's clamoring would fill the halls of the jail. Yet not only had he not spoken in those few weeks, it had already been over 6 months without him breathing a single word. In the end, he could wait no longer. The matter he needed Ryu for was fast approaching, and he could only swallow his pride to make a trip here. Personally, thinking that at the very least, Ryu would be eager to see him. But who knew that this young man wouldn't even bother with his presence? If Ryu was a connecting heaven realm expert like him, this might make sense. After all, they were individuals who stayed in seclusion for years on end sometimes. But a Kai refinement expert wouldn't have experienced such long periods of solitude yet. How could he be completely unfazed? Suddenly, the city lord's pupils constricted. He could no longer feel Ryu's cultivation. In fact, he wasn't even certain if his restrictions were still in place. Wait a minute, restrictions. The city lord's steps trembled. His eyes shone as he flooded them with Kai. But this action only proved his guess. The formations of the cell, they were shattered. How could this city lord feel Ryu's cultivation if he didn't want him to? Because he didn't want to draw too much trouble, Ryu had Ailsa allow his cultivation to be shown as he was stepping into Looming City. But if Ailsa and him didn't want it, even if this city lord was an immortal ring realm expert, he would only be able to sense that Ryu was immortal. Tei's delicate brows furrowed. In the beginning, she was on Ryu's side, believing the words of her cousin and the actions of her father to be overboard. But seeing that Ryu was still acting like this now, she couldn't take it. There was no question she was biased toward her grandfather. After all, she knew the plight he faced. She couldn't help but feel this way. Sir Ryu, don't you think that's enough? Even if you believe my grandfather is in the wrong, don't you believe that he was still merciful in allowing you to live? The Loom clan has need of your services, and will pay you triple what we initially intended in order to service your grievances. Please cease these petty actions. The cultivation world is a cruel place that works based on benefits. You, as a Kai refinement expert, were allowed to live when any other city lord in my grandfather's position, even if they were in need of you, would have killed you immediately to save face. You at least understand this much, right? Tei's frown deepened under Ryu's continued silence. Suddenly, Ryu stood. His abrupt movement caused the fragile garments that covered his torso to crumble to ash, revealing a perfectly sculpted upper body. It was a wonder they had even survived so long under the vicious heat of his rage flames. Ryu walked to the bars of the cell. In an instant, just the slight vibration of his footsteps caused them to collapse. Just like that, metal bars of the black grade disintegrated before their very eyes. Kill me. With just half-step immortal ring cultivation. If Ryu wanted to, he could have escaped long ago. I'm sure City Lord Loom has a lot of credit in the looming auction house, right? He didn't bother to look back as he crossed the face of the grandfather-granddaughter pair, disappearing down the corridor. City Lord Loom's features only grew darker. Follow him. Once he's satisfied, I'll make use of him and do away with this matter. The rage on his features only thickened when he noticed his granddaughter's absent-minded appearance and the deep blush on her face. Almost all cultivators are exceptionally fit, but how could a man be sculpted so perfectly? I wonder, what does his face look like beneath that mask? Regaining her senses, Tay didn't dare to meet her grandfather's eyes any longer. The rage she felt toward Ryu increased even further as she rushed after him. City Lord Loom looked back toward the ash-covered cell. Compared to when Ryu entered, it was absolutely spotless, as though all of its impurities had been burnt away. He couldn't help but feel a shiver. He will never forgive me. He closed his eyes tightly, his fists trembling as though he was making the hardest decision of his life. After this is done, I must kill him. Thinking back to that day he forced Ryu's head to bow, a thick regret turned his intestines green. If he hadn't gone so far, if he had just used a softer method, he wouldn't need to forsake his own morals like this. This matter would without a doubt become an inescapable heart demon. But it was too late. Once he finished making use of this Ryu, he had to destroy this possible future calamity of his Loom clan. The image of a shirtless man who smelt partially of smoke and ash being hurriedly followed by a delicate flower every citizen of Looming City recognized was a matter that spread like wildfire. Though Ryu wasn't exactly trying to leave Tay behind, his body had been practically frozen in the same position for too long. Every step he took, he felt his muscle fibers stretching and his bones crackling. The feeling was comfortable beyond belief, so he basked in it. Unfortunately for the little princess of Looming City, his long strides, coupled with his divine vessel realm body, caused her to have to sprint to keep up with him. This matter astonished Tay. Why did a necromancer have such a strong body? Beyond that, she was a half-step divine vessel realm expert. If she wasn't so talented, it wouldn't be such a disappointment to her clan that she was a woman. Even further, she was an expert in lightness-type techniques. So what she was the most confident in was her movement speed. So how could she not keep up? I need clothing appropriate for a cultivator, preferably ones with exceptionally high fire resistance, Ryu said casually without looking back. Should I continue to go to the auction house, or do you have a better place in mind? Tay grit her teeth. He knew she was following her, yet he actually continued to speed ahead like this. Can you slow down, please? Ryu suddenly halted, looking back with a weird but cold gaze. Tay somehow felt uncomfortable. Ryu's gaze obviously wasn't lustful. In fact, he looked at her no differently than he would a wooden pole. She had never seen a man look at her so unfeelingly in her entire lifetime. Ryu, however, wasn't having such petty thoughts. His confusion was wiped away after a moment. It wasn't because of his body's strength that Tay couldn't keep up with him. It was because he was, subconsciously, melding his very being into the wind. It seemed the wind gate hadn't been completely useless. Taking a deep breath, Tay calmed herself. The Looming Auction House is a place you go only if you're seeking to sell treasures or buy them. If you want more mundane, everyday use items, there are better options. Mundane. Ryu raised an eyebrow. He didn't want something mundane. Would mundane items be able to protect his life at a crucial time? More importantly, would mundane items help him properly extort this city lord and his granddaughter? Don't misunderstand my words. Looming City is the entertainment capital of the Inner Ring. Obviously, its auction house follows suit. The Looming Auction House doesn't buy or sell anything below the higher earth grade in value. Even if you went, there would be less than a dozen items to choose from, and because we emphasize fanfare. You'd have to pay an exorbitant amount over market price to compensate that potential loss. Ryu nodded in understanding. It seemed his misconception was common, which was why the city guard manning the gates didn't bother to correct him when he stated his purpose. Or the more likely reason was that the spectating of looming city auctions attracted all sorts of people. Unfortunately, Ryu missed the most recent auction since he was locked away for half a year. Ryu felt his stomach growl, but he forcefully suppressed it, his visage darkening. As one progressed along the Kai realm, the less food one would need. However, the exact opposite was true for the body realm. Ryu's 4 ancestral bloodlines, especially the lightning killing and fire dragon bloodlines, required mountains of food to sustain. This matter only became more exaggerated after he awakened them. The only reason he wasn't a pile of bones now, after 6 months, was because of the incubator. He was able to grow the spiritual herbs he purchased from the Valor auction house and use it to sustain himself just barely. Unfortunately, his bloodlines had crossed into the realm of divine vessel experts, which meant the black grade herbs he had could only barely work thanks to the abilities of the incubator. Tae had expected Ryu to be embarrassed about the sudden sound of his stomach, but instead, she felt a chilly, cold intent. She could tell immediately that Ryu wasn't trying to hide his embarrassment with anger, but rather that he was truly enraged. She could almost hear his thoughts. How could such a trash loom clan force me to this state? A moment later, the dark intent was gone, causing Tae great confusion. The impression she got from Ryu was that he wasn't someone capable of controlling his emotions. She almost expected him to lash out, which was why she immediately put up her guard. But who knew he would retract his rage so quickly? Just who was he, really, to look down on my fifth-order clan so much? It was only after realizing that Ryu was no longer looking at her and following his gaze that Tae understood why Ryu had forgotten about his anger. It wasn't that he had learned to control himself, but rather that he saw something that interested him more than teaching her a lesson. A very familiar crimson horse suddenly appeared along the busy street, causing many to split, giving it a wide berth. However, the once majestic bloodied steed had seen far better days. Its prided mane had been shaved clean, its bloody aura was several times weaker, and deep scars dug into its once lustrous coat. It was then Tae understood she had made yet another mistake. Ryu's rage hadn't disappeared. It had only been redirected toward a new place. This bloodied steed, it hasn't moved from the entrance of Looming City for months. The Bastille clan tried everything, even humiliating it beyond the bounds of reason, yet it still didn't move an inch. How could it be here now? Could it be that he really tamed it so easily? A heated breath left the steed's lips as it slowed its mad gallop to a trot, reaching Tae and Ryu's side in just another second. Its head stood tall proudly before bowing down and licking Ryu's exposed hand. "It seems we've gone through similar things," Ryu said softly, gently stroking the bloodied steed's jaw. The Bastille clan couldn't bear to kill this bloodied steed off, thinking it was too valuable. Plus, since no one dared to offend them as a half-step sixth-order clan, they didn't worry about someone stealing their beast. Every day, they would appear to use their humiliation tactics to temper down the steed's arrogance, and every day they would leave it to lick its wounds. Unfortunately, it seemed they would be the second clan to make an irredeemable mistake. Watching Ryu's gentle caress of the bloodied steed, Tae felt frozen in place. She found it too difficult to resolve the Ryu, who was a breath away from striking her down for a mere grumbling stomach, with the Ryu, who was delicate and caring. Ryu would never describe himself as a caring person, nor did he have some innate sense of justice. If he did, he probably wouldn't have let Amorous' ex-lover die. After all, he was an innocent man seeking revenge for a past betrayal. Yet Ryu felt nothing watching him be backstabbed by the ruined master. However, when it came to those he had a relationship with, any slight against them was a slight against himself. He had already bound the bloodied steed as his second beast partner. Though their bond had yet to deepen, Ryu's heart trembled when he realized the Crimson Horse held on so long in respect of their relationship. Ryu saw this valiant horse as one of his own. Seeing it in this state made his eyes flicker with rage. "Ill name you, Nemesis." The bloodied steed's hoof rose and slammed into the cobbled stone below. Cracks of spread furiously from the center of his strike, and hot steam blew from its nose. "Ailsa, help me." Ailsa didn't respond with words but immediately helped cross the steed into the ethereal realm, making it simple for Ryu to pass its large body into the incubator. As for the scene of a massive fourth-order beast disappearing, he didn't bother with it. After all, it wasn't a weird sight for a beast tamer to have a beast pocket. In the outer ring, it might be a shock, but it was commonplace here. "Take good care of him." Tay blinked in shock. "You managed to keep your spatial ring. Though my grandfather warned Captain Zhu from breaking the rules, it is part of protocol to confiscate the items of all prisoners." Ryu didn't care to respond to her question. "You were saying?" Tay frowned, looking toward the place the bloodied steed came from. "The Bastille clan won't take kindly to your actions. Too many people witnessed what just happened." "I don't care." Tay grit her teeth, feeling irritated beyond belief. "You can't even stop my clan from locking you away for half a year. The Bastille clan is 10, no, 20 times more powerful than we are. How can you?" In the end, Tay had no choice but to stop her words. Ryu's cold, piercing gaze made her shiver. She felt like if she said one more word, she would lose her life here. "You were saying," Ryu repeated. After a pause, Tay took a deep breath, trying to recollect herself. "If you want to buy mundane items, it's best we go to the Armament Guild. It's not far from here, follow me." Tay solemnly turned her gaze from Ryu, focusing on the task of guiding him. The Armament Guild was a merchant association, and had many hubs of trade across the immortal planes. In all likelihood, they were simply too uninterested in the business of the outer ring to appear there. But Looming City was just barely qualified. In fact, Looming City's Armament Guild was the only one of the inner ring. Only it took on enough human traffic to entice the merchant heads. It wasn't long before Tay and Ryu had made their way to a large, bustling center, only to be stopped. The minimum cultivation required for entry is the half-step divine vessel realm. "Please turn back, Kai Refiner." A guard clad in silver armor stopped Ryu expressionlessly. There wasn't any disdain in his eyes. It looked like he was simply doing his job. Ryu looked back at the guard without much emotion. In a moment, his blood surged under a slight flex of his body. A coursing vital Kai wrapped around him, causing a hidden pressure to tear through the surroundings. At that moment, the expressionless guard's eyes flashed with an indiscernible light. "My apologies, please enter, young sir." Ryu didn't say much directly entering. As he expected, it was much more difficult to discern body realm cultivation than Kai realm cultivation. Though Ryu's Kai density was comparable to the half-step divine vessel realm requirement, the guard still stopped him. However, despite Ryu's body cultivation still being in the pulse tempering realm, the guard couldn't parse it. According to the standards of this Armament Guild, Ryu shouldn't be able to enter unless he reached the vessel tempering realm. This made sense considering the guard's previous logic. But the guard obviously wasn't as good at separating body realms. To this, Tay didn't have much of a reaction. Though Ryu used his body to enter, Tay thought he used his mental realm. After all, someone capable of controlling so many fourth-order corpse puppets was definitely of the spiritual endowment realm, which meant Ryu had already opened his spiritual vessel, which would also give him the right to enter. As for why Ryu decided to secretly expose his bodily strength, maybe only he and Ailsa, who could read his thoughts, knew. The moment Ryu and Tay crossed the barrier, the once quiet atmosphere immediately became bustling and rowdy. Cultivators shouting across several dozen meters, heated bargaining in every corner, and endless rows of sharp eyes merchants were abound. Yet it had an odd structure to it all. However, Ryu hardly cared about this. Instead, he was thinking about something completely different. To think that such a small place has an Armament Guild branch. He grit his teeth. He still had an account tied to his identity as the scion of the Tatsuya clan. As an origin-grade ruin master, Though he funneled most his funds back into the Tatsuya clan, he was wealthier than most people could imagine. Yet, despite having these funds right before him, he didn't dare to touch them. Even though the Armament Guild swore perfect anonymity, he didn't dare trust it. To have such a fortune before himself, yet not dare to touch it. Nothing could be more depressing. Ryu felt like ripping something apart. If he could find a way to use these funds, his journey would become as easy as flowing water until at least the Path Extinction Realm. Ailsa blinked. Oh, Armament Guild. My cultist clan has a few accounts. Ryu's footsteps froze. His gaze shifted, only to land on Ailsa's giggling figure. He knew well she could hear his thoughts, yet this little vixen dared to tease him like this. Just be patient, little Ryu. It's no good if I activate my funds on this plane. After all, they're looking for you, my life partner, right now. However, when we go to higher planes, or a world where there's more fairy activity, I don't mind my little Ryu leaning on a big sister a bit. Hearing these words, Ryu calmed down and nodded. Thank you, Ailsa smiled, her small lips pecking Ryu's cheek. You don't need to thank me. What's mine is yours. Ryu's brow raised slightly. Ailsa seemed warmer than before, but he wasn't sure what happened. Before, though she was caring toward him, it felt like she was doing so more out of responsibility. It was like, to her, the heavens chose him as her life partner, so she would make the most of it. But now it felt more genuine. After a few more moments of thought, he still couldn't figure out why, so he let it go. Still, he inwardly sighed. If Ailsa's feelings were becoming realer, their relationship would be harder for him to handle. Suddenly, an all-encompassing voice stopped his thoughts. The time is finally here, ladies and gentlemen. As you all know, the Armament Guild is famous across not just this martial god realm, but several hundred realms across the cosmos. Ryu inwardly snorted, martial god realm. In his heart, this would forever be the Shrine Realm. It had always been named this in respect to Shrine Mountain, the ancient sturdy figure that stretched through their 6 planes and protected them for countless generations. Yet they actually dared blaspheme their protector spirit by expunging its name. The importance of names couldn't be understated. They were too tied to fate and faith. This wasn't a small slight. Though we built a branch in this looming city, it hasn't been completed until now. Young geniuses across the cosmos come to take part in our armament trial. There are 9 legendary weapons: the sword, the staff, the short blade, the battle axe, the saber, the bow, the spear, the glaive, and the halberd. The ancestor of our armament guild believed that these 9 treasured weapons and their birthed phenomena are the reason behind the rise of our human races against the ancestral beasts. They represent the innovation of genius of the human races. As such, on his deathbed, my ancestor swore to support geniuses of these paths. Come take our armament trial, grasp your destiny, perform well, and you'll be rewarded beyond your imagining. Bonus chapter for 150 golden tickets. Hearing these words, Ryu, who had been feeling anger toward the disrespect shown toward Shrine Mountain, was suddenly hit with a wave of nostalgia. The armament trial was quite famous. Even Ryu himself had taken it. That said, he was only 5 years old at the time, and obviously couldn't place very well. Though for his age group, he probably did well. Back then, his father hadn't allowed him to see his results, and by the time Ryu was old enough to make decisions for himself, the martial path had left him with a false spiritual foundation, so he no longer had the heart to care about how well or poorly he had done. The trial itself was very simple. There were 9 stone monuments, each of which had a single stroke of a weapon etched into its center. Each of the 9 stone monuments represented one of the 9 core weapons. A trial taker would step to the edge of their stone monument sphere of influence, which was about a 100-meter radius, if Ryu recalled correctly. Then, while constrained to the basic stances of your weapon of choice, one would face the latent intent, sending out a strike of your own. In response, under the odd laws of the stone monument, a ray of light would be drawn from your weapon toward where the core of the monument's weapon intent lay. The closer the ray of light was to the stone monument, the better you performed. Those whose ray of light could touch upon the stone monument were rewarded greatly. Of course, there There were different grades for these stone monuments, depending on the expert who etched the weapon intent. It was said that the highest grade, located upon the Armament Guild's holy land, was etched personally by peak sky gods. Ryu wasn't sure if this was true, but if it was, these sky gods were likely invited over. No one clan, sect, or guild could possibly birth 9 peak sky gods, let alone 9 of such vastly differing paths. But to be able to invite such experts over in the first place showed very clearly how powerful this armament guild was. However, whatever excitement and nostalgia Ryu might have felt was quickly doused in cold waters when his gaze landed upon the 9 massive stone monuments. What a disappointment! He muttered to himself coldly, not bothering to look on anymore. The young geniuses of the inner ring were so excited that the stone monuments had appeared, not knowing that the Armament Guild was laughing at them with disdain. These stone monuments, they were even weaker than the version he tested himself with when he was just 5 years old. Even back then, Ryu's ray of light managed to stretch forward by half a meter. Wouldn't he be making a joke of himself taking such a useless armament trial with his current strength? Ryu's gaze shifted without hesitation, not caring any longer. Tae gave him a weird gaze. When she looked toward the stone monuments, she felt as though her very soul was collapsing. 9 imposed realm weapon strokes. How could he not care at all? A part of her wanted to scold Ryu inwardly for trying to act cool, but another part of her remembered back to the precision of his corpse puppets. Could it be he's not faking that he doesn't care? By the time she collected herself, Ryu had gone into the distance. It's more convenient this way. With everyone so focused on that sham trial, the lines have dispersed and the merchants are more free. Little Ryu, there's a nosy someone with eyes a bit too interested in you, Ailsa said softly, a bit irritated, as though no one had the right to look at Ryu but her. Ryu shrugged, his sharp eyes taking in what might and might not be valuable. Any immortal ring realm expert would be capable of hearing what I said casually. Since they only place such pitiful stone monuments down to appease these inner ring geniuses, they want care that I look on their trials the way I do. What the Armament Guild was doing was simply saving the face of their business partners. If they put up monuments to their true standards, the inner ring youth would never be able to rise up again. But if they didn't put up a monument at all, then they might sour their relationship. In the end, it was the inner ring itself that asked to be slapped in the face like this. Yet look at them, running around with smiles on their faces. Ailsa silently nodded in agreement. After all, the expert's gaze wasn't one of hostility, but rather one of interest. Thinking back to Ryu revealing his bodily strength, Ailsa smiled. Her little Ryu was a bit too scheming. If this looming clan didn't know how to let things go, they'll lose more than their foot smashing into an iron plate. Ailsa shook her head. What am I thinking? Even if they know when to take a step back, knowing my little Ryu, he won't let things end so simply. This soft armor, how much? Ryu finally found something to his liking. It was a flexible armor similar to his former ice silk armor, but this one had no affinity. It was woven with the beard hair filaments of a 6th-order diamondback ape. They were known for tempering their almost tortoise-like shell in molten lava conditions, and through a continuous cycle of their hair being burned off or regrown, it not only became sturdy beyond compare, it was also highly fire-resistant. Your eyes are a bit too lofty, boy. The merchant laughed, sitting lazily in his seat in robes a bit too loose for his slight frame. How much? Ryu asked again plainly. 10,000 higher mortal Kai stones. As a treasure formed by a 6th-order beast's body, this soft armor was indeed worthy of such a price. One would only sense immortal Kai upon entering the immortal ring realm. But that was the 7th order, so treasures of this caliber were still dealt with in mortal Kai stones. Don't try to bargain with me, this is a fair price. The merchant continued. Bargain? Ryu shook his head. He wasn't paying anyway. Why would he bother to bargain? Miss, I believe it's your Loom clan's turn. Tae was stunned. This Ryu could actually be so shameless. Don't bother arguing with me, Ryu said coldly. Your inner ring lacks a source of immortal Kai stones, but are overflowing with mortal Kai stones. As a fifth-order clan, your grandfather can bring out 100 times this easily, especially since he runs the entertainment capital of your lands. Tay clenched her fists. Why was he so ignorant in some areas, but so sharp in others? She could only watch as her family's wealth vanished before her eyes. The merchant sighed. It's a shame that such a good piece is being wasted like this. Ryu smiled coldly but said nothing. Now that he was slowly coming into contact with more and more powerful beasts, his shrine plane knowledge was starting to become useful again. He was too used to strong beasts with great bloodlines, so he knew too little about their weaker counterparts. But when it came to beasts with great potential like the diamond-back ape, even if he didn't know as much as a beast master would, he still had quite a few tidbits of useful information. The reason the merchant was lamenting this sale was because the true strength of this soft armor wouldn't appear unless its owner could catalyze the hair filaments it was woven from to react. Essentially, one needed to bathe the soft armor in oppressively hot flames in battle. If one could do this, the soft armor would harden into a complex crystalline structure, boosting its defensive abilities by over 10 times. The diamond-back ape was named as such not because it had a rock attached to its back. Its so-called tortoise-like shell was actually a dense patch of hair that protected its vulnerable spine. When it was agitated with enough heat, it would become the 103rd hardest material in existence, flame crystal. Of course, Ryu had no intention of explaining to the merchant that he was more than qualified to reach this standard. Sell me those robes as well, Ryu said casually. All 3 of them. Ryu pointed out a rack of black robes with silver embroidery hidden in its inner working. Looking down at his haggard and shirtless self, it really was too unsightly for a scion of the Tatsuya clan. He needed to change. These robes didn't have defensive properties as good as the diamond-back soft armor, but the silver embroidery was a specialty of the spiritual seamstress profession. A good spiritual seamstress would be able to make clothes an extension of one's meridians, using special techniques to etch paths of Kai into clothing. These clothes could not only change their size to fit their owner, but they could provide a small boost to fighting ability, though that boost was often negligible. This set of 3 robes provided a negligible boost, but Ryu was more interested in their resilience. After binding to clothes creating by a good spiritual seamstress, the clothing would gain the attributes of its owner, thus making it resistant to techniques or elements its owner might use. It was a good option for Ryu, who was tired of his clothes bursting apart on him. These are 6th-order spiritual robes. Even if they aren't as valuable as they soft armor, they're still expensive. 1,000 higher mortal Kai stones each. This so-called 6th order meant that these clothes should be able to survive a battle between connecting heaven realm experts. Assuming its owner also had this level of strength, Ryu didn't bargain and left the exchange to Tay without a care in the world. Since when were bumpkins allowed into the Armament Guild Bazaar? Guards, escort him out, his appearance is unsightly. A familiar voice rang in Ryu's ears, but it was far gloomier than the last time he heard it. He didn't bother to turn around. With the stone monuments having been up for a while now, there were without a doubt quite a few disappointed trial takers. For these trash to find someone to vent their anger on was normal, but even Ryu couldn't help but find that it was amusing that this person calling him a bumpkin had been beaten into the ground by him just half a year prior. Wasn't he embarrassing himself more this way? To make matters worse, he was trying to command Armament Guild guards. Did he accidentally hit this bestial clan young master too hard on the head back then? A well-dressed man by Tharon's side laughed. Tharon, do you really need to take out your anger on an innocent passerby just because your performance was so trash? It's no wonder you lost your first heir position to your younger brother. Even the bestial clan, known for their fiery temperaments, decided they'd be run into the ground if they were led by you. You must have been hit a bit too hard all those months ago. Another young man laughed, trying to command Armament Guild guards, distrusting the vetting process of the Armament Guild. He could be covered in shit, and it still wouldn't be your turn to tell the Armament Guild who they can and can't allow in. Use your head for once and maybe you wouldn't lose so badly all the time. In truth, to onlookers who gazed over curiously, Ryu really did seem unsightly, and because he had taken a backseat to the transaction between Tae and the merchant, it seemed he was watching on while someone else bought something he could never afford. No one's first thought would ever be that the beautiful back view of Tae was actually in the process of running an errand for this haggard young man. Tharon clenched his fists. The two who had just spoken were the first heirs to the Zai and Vin clan, two clans that shared equal status with his Bastille clan and the Zhu clan. Of course, there was also the silent first heir of the Croft clan lagging behind them. Their statuses had once been equal, but after Tharon lost so much face for the Bastille clan and had the bloodied steed they had so much hope in become subservient to another, his status plummeted. In the end, his younger brother, who had become an herbologist at a young age, took his place. It was rare for the Bastille clan to birth someone so intelligent and charismatic, so the elders decided that maybe the younger Bastille might have a better chance of leading them past the plateau their clan had been stuck on for the past several millennia. As these young men were taunting and jeering back and forth, a shocking scene occurred. The beautiful back view of Tae turned around, revealing a visage they all recognized. Tharon's gaze lit up. Fairy Tae. Unfortunately, his words were caught in his throat and his face darkened as he watched the fairy in his heart take a stack of 4 neatly folded armors and spiritual clothing, only to hand them to the very same country bumpkin he had tried to have kicked out only to be ignored. To make matters worse, he suddenly felt that the so-called bumpkin was too familiar. For some reason, despite only being 10 or so meters away, he couldn't make out Ryu's exact figure, and even though he could plainly feel that Ryu's hair was fluttering, he couldn't make out its color either. It was as though everything about him was covered in a veil his senses couldn't pierce through. He suddenly remembered that the last time he had this feeling was 6 months ago. It was then that Ryu finally turned around. Not just Tharon, but even the heirs around him were stunned. Obviously, this wasn't because they recognized Ryu, but rather because they were all intelligent people who instantly understood some things based on the half-mask before them. Not long later, they all, aside from Tharon and the silent Croft clan heir, began laughing uproariously, unable to keep it in. Hey Tharon, this country bumpkin, that's what you called him, right? He can't be that necromancer that beat you into the ground with his fists, right? The Zai family heir wiped tears from his eyes, hardly able to contain himself. Ha ha, I can't take it. If he's a country bumpkin, what are you exactly? The Vin family heir could only pile on, clutching his stomach. Tharon's fists clenched as pulsing veins crawled across his forehead. No matter how he tried to explain, it was useless. Losing to a necromancer might not have been that big of a deal. However, losing to not Ryu's corpse puppet, but his fist, was an absolute loss of face. Everyone knew the weakness of a necromancer. It was an open secret, yet he was directly beaten down by what should have been Ryu's weakest aspect. In reality, this wasn't entirely untrue, because he had entered the second mental realm, the spiritual endowment realm, and had expanded his mental realm to 20 kilometers. Even after his vast bodily improvements, Ryu's mental realm was arguably his strongest strength. At 20 kilometers, that was already more than enough for most normal mental realm masters to begin to prep for entry into the soul birth realm, though it was well short of what geniuses would push their limits to before then. Ryu could be said to be above the average. To make matters worse, Tharon didn't just lose, he was left without the ability to fight back. What made this so terrible was that his Bastille clan's special earth affinity should have given him an incredibly sturdy body, yet he could do nothing to Ryu. Even now, Tharon couldn't wrap his head around how he had lost so badly. Back then, he had felt that something locked onto his soul, a presence so fierce that he didn't dare to fight back. He was unable to shake it off even after he fell unconscious. By the time City Lord Loom appeared, he had already regained consciousness, but after losing all face, he didn't dare to stand again. He only felt that his hatred was partially vented after the City Lord proceeded to humiliate Ryu in turn. But why was it then that the city lord's granddaughter was here with the man who humiliated him? Wasn't he afraid to offend his bastille clan? A moment later, his intent deflated once more. He understood why this city lord dared to release Ryu now. Since he wasn't the first heir of the current generation any longer, the city lord tying himself to this mysterious young man was obviously not a problem. Seeing that the usually fiery Tharon become so deflated, the Zai and Vin clan heirs looked disappointed. They had hoped that Tharon would embarrass himself once more by fighting Ryu, but it seemed he no longer dared to do so. Still, they didn't seem satisfied letting things end like this, or else how would they vent their frustrations? The true reason they piled onto Tharon so fiercely was because the latter was truly their better in terms of strength. They could only get the leg up on him by using their brains to outsmart this straightforward, mindless individual. But it seemed they had underestimated the impact Ryu's strength had had on Tharon's mental state. Though they believed he was afraid, this wasn't actually how Tharon was feeling. Physiologically speaking, his body involuntarily trembled before Ryu, but his mind was actually quite firm. The truth was that he was really trying to figure out why his body was responding this way. As for Ryu, other than the indifferent expression on his face, he was inwardly feeling a bit disappointed. If these were the best youths the inner ring had to offer, whatever it was this city lord needed help with wouldn't help temper his strength at all. If it's like this, there's no point in me remaining here, though further revenge would be nice. Settling for stealing their pay for nothing in return will have to be enough. Ryu felt like the plans he had begun to carefully place down had become useless. He too could feel that Tharon was the strongest of the four of them. Well, other than the exceptionally silent Croft clan heir. This is what you needed my help with. Ryu gave Tae a cold glance. You alone would have a 70% chance of beating them even if they came all at once. Seeing Tae's shocked then, bitter expression, Ryu suddenly understood. I see. So your grandfather is not only a fool in running a city and laying its rules, he's also a fool in running his own clan. Ignoring talent for such a meaningless reason, he's not fit to be a leader. Don't talk about my grandfather. Like that, Tae's bitterness turned to rage, her petite figure seemingly growing several sizes. But upon further inspection, it was only her aura that grew. Ryu coldly met her eyes, his expression not shifting. This was always how things went. No matter how much Tae cursed her grandfather in her mind, she wouldn't allow others to do so, least of all an outsider. Those around suddenly felt an eerie silence. Ryu hadn't bothered to lower his voice. Those who recognized the necromancer of several months ago had weird expressions on their faces. It seemed whatever the city lord did to him hadn't been enough to teach him a lesson. Seeing that her outburst had caught a lot of attention, Tae glared at Ryu, but the latter only walked away. He still had to find parts for the death worm immortal cave. As the bazaar began to regain its rowdiness, Tae followed Ryu to pass by the four heirs with an unresigned expression filled with unwillingness. It was only then that the silent Croft heir turned to gaze at Ryu's back. The matter isn't as simple as you think, Tae said stiffly. The inner ring clans are just pawns of the core region. We have the largest deposits of mortal Kai stones on the pedestal plane. Even if true experts of the core region only truly care about immortal Kai stones, I'm sure you understand the importance of a foundation. All of us here in the inner region do nothing but dance on the puppet strings of others. Which clans rise and which ones fall are all decided by those larger clans. Because of the appearance of the Ice Devil Legacy world, the matters pertaining to this selection were moved up. Everything is especially accelerated because the Zhu clan is quickly rising in power. There are rumors that their first Grand Elder might become their clan's third Immortal Ring expert, even if they don't have enough connecting Heaven Realm experts to become an official Sixth Order clan. This alone makes them more powerful than some true Sixth Order clans, who only have one Immortal Ring Realm expert. The moment the Zhu clan's patriarch followed their ancestors' footsteps and entered the Immortal Ring Realm, the Zhu clan already became capable of controlling their own destiny. Knowing this, A series of tacit agreements were silently made. The Zhu clan would be allowed to shift their base of power to the better core region lands, and the balance of strength of our inner ring would be shuffled and shifted once more. The Zhu clan members continuously talk about how they're just laying the foundation for the coming thousands of years, but this is just a facade. In truth, in as little as 10 more years, the Zhu clan will move. For much of the latter half of her spiel, Tay used a Kai line. These talks were too sensitive for just any ears. Ryu inwardly laughed. If the Zhu clan had managed to get their hands on the crystalline jade, their rise would have been assured. Even without it, their foundations were far deeper than even the core region hegemons. Ryu speculated that these shrewd individuals of the core region understood that this was only the outward showing of the Zhu clan's strength, so they prudently decided to help them along instead of becoming their enemy. In the end, the rise of the Zhu clan threw the inner ring into a heated turmoil. Maybe the appearance of this armament guild bazaar wasn't just coincidence either. I'm sure you understand by now, but the core region clans have a vested interest in some of us winning, and an even keener interest in some of us losing. My Loom clan, unfortunately, happens to be in the latter category. Though we are the clear heir apparent to Zhu clan territory, there are many who don't want to see us win. And we are also dealing with many internal disputes. Tay took a deep breath, trying to calm her emotions, thinking back to her cousin, Iria. In the coming weeks, there will be many sudden appearances of hidden geniuses. I'm sure I don't need to explain to you where these geniuses come from. Ryu nodded. Obviously, the core region clans would be sending their own to assure that the clans they have a stake in win. Maybe sometime in the past, the Loom clan would have received some of this hidden support, but they likely angered someone they shouldn't have, leading to many taking a hands-off approach. A system like this one only truly works if they maintain a thin veil of cordiality, so no one would do anything too overt to the Loom clan. After all, the core region was very far away, and they had their own internal disputes to worry about. The strength of a fifth-order clan couldn't be casually handled even by a sixth-order one. Like this, the Loom clan had a path to live, but it was a very small one. Ryu had thought that City Lord Loom needed his help to win some sort of prize to allow him to enter the immortal ring realm, but it turned out that this was only one of his asks. Tay bit her lip, seemingly wanting to explain how the Loom clan fell into this sort of situation. But in the end, she couldn't bring herself to. The only clues to her thoughts were the raging emotions in her watery eyes. Feelings of rage, disgust, and helpless were only just a few. Ryu, however, had long since stopped paying attention. He smiled coldly. That's more like it. I guess it'll stay. Ryu quickly tossed these matters to the back of his mind. As far as he was concerned, the more dangerous the situation, the better. As things were currently, he didn't have a true goal for the next year and a half until the eclipse. He thought that, in this time, the only challenge he might receive was as a contestant for one of the positions, to enter the Ice Devil Legacy world. Originally, he had been planning on joining as an unknown after he reached the core region, mostly because he couldn't be bothered to enter each and every tournament. Not only would fighting against outer and inner ring geniuses not be any sort of challenge, it would be a waste of his time. But now, this sort of political intrigue had caught his attention. The wealth of the inner ring wasn't something new to this era. Ryu's Tatsuya clan had no need of it, but many of their subordinate clans once had hands in this region. The geography of the inner ring was a bit special. Its total Kai wasn't as dense as the core region, but for some reason, its mortal Kai density was incredibly high. This resulted in many mortal Kai mines, forming to the point where it outshone the core region in this aspect. Not only this, but it had an exceptionally high number of common, black and earth-grade treasures as a result. Of course, the core region's immortal Kai density was far higher, which was why those powerful clans didn't bother to take over this inner ring territory. But they were intriguing enough to the point where they weren't ignored either. To put things into perspective, no matter how dense the inner ring's mortal Kai was, it couldn't hold a candle to the Blossom Plain, let alone the Shrine Plain. But for this pedestal plane, there was no better region. In fact, this was one of the reasons, other than Hecate's legacy, that Ryu came here instead of comfortably cultivating within the awoken moon sect. This was all to say that the core region definitely wouldn't underestimate this competition. Even if they didn't care for the strength of the inner ring, they would definitely care about the kind of geniuses their rivals might send to their pawns, so they wouldn't lack either. The next coming weeks would be interesting. Ryu quickly shifted around the bazaar, relying on his eyesight and sometimes saw to find what he needed. He bought many precious metals for the Death Worm Immortal Cave, and eventually forced Tay to spend over 200,000 higher Mortal Kai stones. Since Ryu now understood just how important this matter was to the Loom clan, he also knew that they would go all out in this stage. Taking advantage of them like this helped alleviate some of the rage in his heart. Tilda a distance away. "What are you looking at, old man?" A middle-aged man yawned, casually scratching his crotch. The old man, despite having a head of white hair, shone with the vigor of a 30-year-old. If it wasn't for the slight wrinkles around his eyes, one would think that he really was that young. Unfortunately, these wrinkles became more pronounced after he laid eyes on the man who spoke. "You're a cultivator, yet you yawn. Aren't you embarrassed wasting so much energy at those brothels? You're nothing but a shame to my Haystam clan. Who asked you to bring me to a place with so many pretty ladies?" The middle-aged man snorted. "This entertainment capital is pretty good. You should join me one day." Black lines drew across old man Haystam's face. One only needed to understand that this middle-aged man was his son to understand the ridiculous nature of the words he just heard. Seeing that his old man's temper was about to flare, the younger Haystam quickly changed the subject. "What were you smiling about?" Blinking out of his rage, the old man was silent for a moment before smiling once more. "Nothing much. I just saw a young man with far more potential than you. He appears to be a necromancer, but he has the air of the impose realm. Not to mention the fact his body is actually so powerful. These stone monuments are nothing to him." But even as he was praising, the old man sighed. "Unfortunately, he's far too ambitious. He very clearly has the ring of the mercenary guild on his hand. Yet he came to flirt with my armament guild. What a troublesome youth." The middle-aged man grinned. "Whoever said just one skirt was enough? One must bathe in skirts to the point of suffocating, or else how will you know that you are a man?" The old man's hand swiped up faster than his son could react, giving him a clear, reverberating slap to the back of the head. "Would it kill you to shut up about women?" Looking incredibly wronged, the middle-aged man rubbed the back of his head. "What's the big deal? You know that the mercenary guild is exactly that, a guild of mercenaries. They don't restrict the activity of their members. Plus, considering he has a necromancer's mask, he's technically already part of the necromancer guild as well. Another guild that doesn't restrict their members. What's the problem? Clearly the kid doesn't care, so why should you?" This was exactly why even Captain Zhu didn't dare to take off Ryu's mask. The half-mask of a necromancer was the symbol of the necromancer guild. Even if one didn't join personally, as long as you inherited the mask from another, you would receive a bare minimum of protection. To necromancers, their identity was sacred due to the sensitivity of their path of cultivation. They were often enemies with many clans, simply by virtue of the corpse puppets they used. As a result, the Necromancer Guild protected their own by placing a strict taboo on forcefully taking a half-mask off. If one was ever found to have done such a thing, you would become an enemy of the Necromancer Guild to be hunted down to death. Of course, the Necromancer Guild wouldn't care if Ryu was killed, but his mask must never be removed. This was a matter of precedence they had to set no matter the cost. I would agree in a normal situation, but there are two issues. Firstly, the fact that he doesn't care is already a problem. Our armament guild isn't like those other guilds. Only the most powerful and talented among us can be unrestricted. If you can't give equivalent value for what you take and you wish to be unrestricted, can there ever be such a free thing in this world? And secondly, he's not a normal member of the mercenary guild. The middle-aged man's eyes widened. "You mean Old man Hastem nodded heavily. His ring carries the will of a sky god. Not only has he joined their guild, he was accepted into the faction of one of their sky gods. Which sky god doesn't matter, the fact he was acknowledged is enough. The old man shook his head. What was the Loom clan thinking, so ignorantly offending such a young man? The fact he didn't immediately expose this means he's seeking revenge for himself. Such a little seedling is truly too good. It pains me to pass him up. There's a third reason too, isn't there? The middle-aged man said darkly. Looking into the distance, old man Hastem sighed once more. Such large matters have nothing to do with us father and son, ostracized to the point of coming to this small inner ring. With such weak, immortal chi density, I can forget about taking another step forward even with another 10,000 years. Father, there must be a reason for such striking chi imbalance in the inner ring. Maybe this is an opportunity. Matters have been like this for countless billion years. Even if it was an opportunity, how would it be our turn to take advantage of it? You're so depressing. If you're going to be such a downer, stop looking at me with disdain for finding ways to enjoy myself. Who said that? I've given up. Watch your mouth, boy. Old man Hastem growled. His figure seemed to grow one size larger. Those bastards of the Hastem main line will feel my wrath one day. But that day is not today. A man must not also have many skirts. He must also have patience. The middle-aged man grinned. Those who said his perverted nature came from nowhere obviously didn't know his old man. As for the large matters having nothing to do with the father-son pair, these could only be related to these large looming guilds. The Armament Guild, the Mercenary Guild, the Necromancer Guild. They were just three of many, and the relationship between them wasn't so simple at all. Tilda Tay walked Ryu to a luxurious guest courtyard before ordering a gargantuan amount of food at Ryu's request. In 3 days, there will be a meeting of my Loom clan. It is then my grandfather will introduce you to the family. When that day comes, you must prove yourself and silence the doubters. I don't know why my grandfather decided to put his trust in you so quickly, but I assume he has his reasons. As she spoke, an entourage of half a dozen maids and butlers began to wheel in cart after cart of food. I hope when the time comes, you'll prove to be worth the investment. Biting her lip, she hesitated but decided to add one more thing. This meeting won't be as simple as you think. My grandfather has the power to suppress naysayers and even forcefully nominate you to represent the clan, but he doesn't have the power to stop them from testing you. You could very well die, so place down your arrogance and take this seriously. Ryu didn't respond. He sat in the dining room of this guest courtyard he was given and began to eat, slowly satiating the raging hunger of his beast bloodlines one after another. You might want to bring more food, Ryu said in response before directly ignoring Tay. He didn't have a mind to care about Tay's words. Instead, he was thinking about the bloodied steed, Nemesis. He still remembered when Ailsa told him the talents of this beast. Even 6 months later, he was still intrigued. In the end, Tay could only suffer the same frustration Alina and Melody before her had. Stomping her feet, she left in a rage. Though she didn't wish death upon Ryu, she hoped he would be injured to the point he could no longer maintain his nonchalance. Hey little guy, you've grown big. Ryu smiled lightly, petting Little Rock's long, majestic silver-feathered neck. His plumes shimmered with a metallic rainbow light, almost making his feathers look more like the scales of a dragon than the coat of an elegant bird. It had been a long while since Ryu laid eyes on Little Rock, mostly because he had been in a cell for the past half-year. That said, the infant lightning hawk had grown much more powerful in the last months. Its speed of growth was far beyond that of Ryu, and had already stepped into the higher 4th Order realm from the peak 3rd Order realm of just a little under a year ago. Beasts truly had a grand advantage over humans. Even the greatest geniuses amongst humans needed 10 years to clear the spiritual severing realm. Yet this little guy, even with its mind still being so immature, had completed over 60% of its equivalent realm in just a year. By Ailsa's estimation, Little Rock wasn't even 2 years old yet. He had been even younger when Ryu met him, yet he already reigned over a large portion of that dangerous obsidian mountain of lightning. The little guy's wingspan was a little short of 10 meters now, growing from its previous 6. But luckily, this courtyard was spacious enough that it didn't matter much. Ryu even summoned Nemesis together with him, allowing them to become a bit more acquainted. After all, to Ryu, these two were his family now. Not only would he treat them well, they would be together for a very long time. Ryu assumed that the Bastille clan would notice very soon that Nemesis had disappeared from the gates of the city, but he didn't care. Seeing Ryu grow attached to these two beasts so quickly, Ailsa felt a pang in her heart. Even if he didn't admit it himself, Ailsa understood where this subconscious dependence came from. Kai tilde Kai tilde. Little Rock's clear, sonorous call comforted Ryu and greeted Nemesis. Its tone was gentle, ringing like a silver bell. Though Ryu couldn't understand, he felt a warmth spread within his chest. Ni tilde Ni tilde. Hot steam blew from Nemesis' nostrils. He still hadn't fully recovered from the torture he experienced for the last few months, but his head was still held high. He didn't want Little Rock to think any less of him. Once their souls mature, they'll be able to communicate with you in human language. Usually only the most talented beasts can comprehend human tongues, but I don't think these two will have this problem. Unfortunately, you aren't a beast tamer and haven't learned any communication techniques, so you'll only be able to subtly comprehend their meanings for now. Ailsa explained. What constitutes mature? Ryu asked curiously. Beasts cultivate with their spiritual roots, as you know, so their method of improvement is slightly different. They don't have 3 paths to choose from like humans do. They only have one. They essentially cultivate every path at once, with preset talents, depending on bloodline grade. Simply put, once they reach the equivalent of the soul birth realm, they shouldn't have any problem learning human language. Ryu nodded. Humans entered the soul birth realm after opening both their spiritual pulse and spiritual vessel. Then, after completing their immortal ring, they'd step into the soul birth realm. If this was translated to beasts, this would be between the 7th and 8th orders. Technically, one could enter the soul birth realm and open their spiritual sea right after opening their spiritual vessel. Since Ryu had opened his spiritual vessel, he could do so as well. In fact, he was very tempted. Once Ryu entered the soul birth realm, he'd finally be strong enough to feel his soul ties with Alina. He wanted to know if she was okay, if she was living well, where she was. However, Ryu knew that he had to complete his immortal ring first. Though entering the soul birth realm now would give him a great boost in power, it would only be short-term benefits at the cost of his foundation. If he ruined himself now, how would he save Alina in the future? A few more years of worry and anguish was worth becoming strong enough to take revenge in the future. The utmost geniuses of the Shrine Plane took about 10,000 years to complete their immortal ring, but Ryu was confident in only needing a fraction of the time. In the future, when he was strong enough to reach his soul out toward his wife, he'd be able to stand tall before her and confidently tell his love to wait for his return. He'd lay all those who slighted her to waste. Ailsa smiled lightly. Ryu's emotions had been fluctuating wildly recently. He even seemed like he could explode at any moment. But this firm resolve was something that had never wavered even once. Taking a deep breath, Ryu lightly stroked Nemesis' mane. It was much shorter than it had been before, but after only a few hours under Ailsa's care, much of its scars had faded, and its previous brilliance was shining through once more. You never finished telling me before, Ryu said. How talented is little Nemesis exactly? Well, Nemesis is currently at the peak 4th order, but this isn't his limit. In order to control him, the Bastille clan suppressed his cultivation for many years. If he had been allowed to grow normally, it might already be at the 7th order, despite being less than 20 years old. Unfortunately, the Bastille clan flooded its bloodline with a concoction of poisons it was forced to take over several years. By now, the poison has already seeped deep into its marrow, making every step forward far more difficult. This might also be because they were afraid of Nemesis' talent, attracting the attention of the core region. In the last 6 months, It seemed their concoction became more vicious. They likely assumed that their years of investment would go to waste, so they decided to try to ruin Nemesis' talent entirely. They didn't go too far because they still held on a little hope, but its situation is far worse today than it had been a half-year ago. If it remains like this, even 100 years wouldn't be enough to enter the Fifth Order. Ryu's jaw clenched. Nemesis' deep black eyes shimmered with a watery light, but there was an endless defiance in their depths, as though the actions of the Bastille clan were meaningless to him. It shouldn't be a problem. In as little as 3 months, I should be able to cleanse this little crimson tyke of its ailments. In the meantime, it won't be able to display its usefulness just yet. You'll have to be patient. Ryu shook his head. He didn't care much about Nemesis being immediately useful. He just felt relieved that he could be helped. If Nemesis' future was completely ruined, it would have been largely due to his own brashness. Ryu would never regret his actions if he was the only one affected. In fact, he was used to only having himself to worry about now, so he often acted in this way. But he wouldn't forgive himself if he harmed those he cared for. Since he had taken Nemesis as his partner, it should have been his responsibility to look after him, but he failed. Ryu swore to make up for that. Still, you should be excited. The abilities of this bloodied steed aren't so simple as mere cultivation speed. Its most potent ability is already right in front of you: its size. Ryu blinked before frowning. Its size. Before Ailsa even said anything more, Ryu's eyes widened. A beast on the verge of entering the Fifth Order was innately large. This wasn't something they could help. Even Little Rock already had a wingspan of 10 meters, so why was it that Nemesis was only one size larger than a normal horse? Logically, it should already be at least 5 meters tall, even if it was stunted. This, Ailsa smiled. Beasts are both blessed and cursed with powerful bodies. In truth, they reach their optimal size after completing their mortal realm cultivation. This is the connecting heaven realm equivalent, or the Sixth Order. Unfortunately, at no consent of their own, beasts uncontrollably grow larger and larger as they become more and more powerful. The strength of their bodies becomes too much to keep in a compact form, so even ancestral beasts become several kilometers long in size once they reach higher realms of cultivation. Have you ever wondered why human experts can battle beasts so much larger than them? Logically speaking, if a Fifth Order beast standing at over 10 meters tall meets a divine vessel realm expert at barely 2 meters tall, if their strengths were properly scaled, the beast would win 10 out of 10 times. However, though beasts are acknowledged to be more powerful than humans, things don't always scale like this. The reason is that the strength of beasts is dissipated as their bodies grow instead of that strength scaling up. Knowing this, I'm sure you understand why Nemesis is so valuable, right? Ryu's heart palpitated. If the strength of a beast meant to be 10 meters tall was compressed into just under 3 meters, wouldn't that make the beast 3 times more powerful than normal? And what if Nemesis continued to improve and entered a stage where he should be dozens of meters tall, hundreds of meters tall, several kilometers tall? If the benefits continued to stack, it would be enough to make any beast tamer green with envy. Humans and humanoid species have 4 central pillars of talent: spiritual foundation grade, bloodline grade, skeletal grade, and meridian grade. However, beasts only have 2, bloodline grade and bloodline talent grade. Little Rock has yet to awaken any bloodline talents, but Nemesis has awakened 2. The first is of the ancestral grade, the adept body bloodline talent. This allows it to control its body as it pleases, thus allowing it to maintain what it believes is its most optimal size. This is most definitely a mutated bloodline talent, because it shouldn't originally appear in the bloodied steed lineage despite their noble ancestors. However, that is only one aspect of the talent. Greater aspects will make themselves clear very soon. The second talent is only of the black grade and is an original talent of the bloodied steed lineage. But in combination with the first talent, it will give not only you, but all of your beasts a massive boost in strength. This talent is known as the bloodied lineage bloodline talent. Because of the history of the bloodied steed, they often have trouble reproducing despite their low species ranking. In order to not die out, they gained the ability to transfer their bloodline to lesser creatures and raise them up to greater heights. This also allowed young bloodied steeds to quickly grow their power by relying on their parents. You mean? That's right. Normally, this bloodline talent is lackluster. After all, the bloodied steed only has a middle black grade bloodline, while even Little Rock has a wisp of lightning rock blood that raises its bloodline to the peak earth grade. So, normally, who would care about it being able to share its talent? But now, Ryu's eyes lit up with excitement. He wasn't one to lose control of his emotions. But this matter truly opened an inconceivably large door to him. If things were like this, he would be able to directly ignore the necromancer path. Why bother when Nemesis was such a boon for him? All he had to do was adventure and rely on Ailsa's sharp eyes to find talented beasts for him to take under his wing. With a few decades of growth, his power would become inconceivable. This is where the bloodied steed got their name. They have a habit of sharing their blood, coupled with their crimson appearance, and the namesake is only natural. Does Big Sis think I should abandon the necromancer path and focus on the beast tamer path then? I shouldn't split my attention, no. Ailsa was shocked at Ryu's words before she giggled happily. She knew Ryu was in a good mood, even calling her Big Sis without any reluctance. But in the end, she controlled herself and shook her head firmly. No, if anything, you should pursue the necromancer path with a fiercer ambition. Enter their ranks and prove yourself as best you can. Do everything you can do to find the legacy of a summoning necromancer, or gain the acknowledgement of one. Ryu raised his brows, unable to understand Ailsa's fervent attitude. Remember, I mentioned the history of the bloodied steed. Their lineage is even deeper than I alluded to. You know well that summoning necromancers make contracts with creatures of the nether realm. However, you don't know quite yet that these creatures have grades amongst themselves, though they are all outstandingly powerful. The stronger a summoning necromancer, the greater creatures they can summon and command. The adept body bloodline talent isn't as simple as it sounds. Bloodline talents have two major categories: blessed talents and sin talents. This ancestral grade bloodline is a sin talent of the highest order. The heavens do not like its existence, and will do everything it can to eradicate it. When Nemesis must face his future tribulations, because of his weak bloodline grade, he will most definitely fall. The only way to ensure his survival is by raising its bloodline grade and strength. The reason I say that you must become a summoning necromancer is because the best way to raise Nemesis talent is by using his ancestor lineage as sacrifices. Nemesis must continuously absorb their spiritual roots to raise his own grade. Nemesis ancestor lineage. Ailsa nodded heavily. The bloodied steed is the far weaker branch, descendant of a creature known as the Wrath Knight. It is one of the summonings a necromancer can perform. I don't know how it happened, but Nemesis awakened a sin talent that should have only been available to the most talented of Wrath Knights with the purest bloodlines. Even they who only have heaven grade and above bloodline grades often die after being born with this talent, let alone little Nemesis, who is still of the black grade. I alone can raise Nemesis talents by a margin, but it will only be a small measure that won't work infinitely. This, in the end, is the best solution. Entering the nether world with your own strength will take too long. Nemesis may die long before you are capable of that. But if you become a summoning necromancer and learn how to summon these creatures here, you won't have to enter the nether realm, and can thus summon weaker Wrath Knights to slowly increase Nemesis' strength. Coming to this understanding, Ryu nodded, a firm resolve in his eyes. A part of him preferred having something to push him to his limits. Ailsa smiled. It isn't all depressing, though. After I purge Nemesis of his poison, his strength will increase by a large margin. And once this is complete, entering the fifth order will only take a few moments. By then, he should learn the second talent of the bloodied steed, bloodied lineage reversal. Seeing that Ailsa wanted to tease him without explaining what this talent could do, Ryu didn't mind her anymore and spent a silent 3 days with his cultist fairy, his lightning hawk, and his bloodied steed. Nemesis already had 2 sin talents, and would soon awaken a third. This might be a headache for anyone else, but Ryu was quite excited. This would be a challenge, but it was also a chance to grow. It was then, on the third day, a familiar voice came from the front of his guest courtyard. "It's time," Ryu calmly responded to Tei's call. Ailsa, who had been in her full form, napping on his arm, shrunk down to sit on his shoulder. As for Nemesis and Little Rock, they entered the spacious incubator. If other beasts tamed by beastmasters knew these two could frolic so freely even while contained, they'd turn green with jealousy without a doubt. Ryu wore his black spiritual seamstress robe. The subtle silver embroidery gave him an otherworldly aura, as the cloth responded excitedly to his kai. Though Ryu's kai density was still far too weak for this set of robes, the purity in his kai was enough to use a small percentage of its strength. Of course, beneath these robes, the soft armor woven of diamond-back ape fur clung tightly to his proportions. Tei's lip couldn't help but twitch when she saw Ryu so shamelessly, where everything their Loom clan had purchased for him. Was he trying to purposely provoke their ill intentions? Ryu, however, wasn't thinking in such useless terms. To him, he was currently in enemy territory. Since the enemy was so kind to give a great boon to his strength, why would he feign politeness? If he was backstabbed, when would he have time to regret it? He simply used what gave him the best chance for survival. Nothing more, nothing less. Though he liked to give himself a challenge, he wasn't foolish to the point of not realizing he still stood no chance against City Lord Loom. He had to take every advantage he could get. Tei once more had trouble keeping up with Ryu's speed, but luckily, Ryu didn't get too far ahead. After all, this was Tei's home, and he didn't know where he was going. "Serves you right," Tei harumphed as they reached a branching hall. "Walking so quickly, putting on such airs. Now politely ask me which way to go." Unfortunately, even as Tei was daydreaming about forcing Ryu to heal, she didn't realize that her subconscious actions had already given away the right answer. With Ryu's sharp eyes, he didn't even need to turn around to see her subtle movements. All he needed was third perspective. Ailsa held onto her toned belly as she died of laughter. On one hand, Tei's enraged and helpless face was too adorable to not make fun of, but on the other, this life partner of hers was too cruel. He couldn't let someone else win even one round, no matter how small. Tei was a delicate girl after all. How petty. Ryu pretended not to understand what Ailsa was chuckling about. In just a few strides, he reached the end of the hall to meet two massive dark wood doors with two knights on either side. Neither guard even reacted to Ryu's appearance. Neither did Ryu spare them a glance. With a swift motion, the double doors were pushed open, flooding the partially dimmed hallway with a gentle but bright light. Tei's brows couldn't help but furrow. Why does he seem so used to such surroundings? Isn't he nameless? In an instant, though, Tei lost the chance to leisurely reflect over these things because, even without having stepped into the Loom clan's grand hall, her feet froze, her petite frame involuntarily shivering. She had been so angry with Ryu that she momentarily forgot just how much she hated this grand hall. To others of their clan, this was a place of pride, where only the strongest among them could step. But to Tei, no, to Teidra Loom, this place housed nothing but her nightmares. Ryu's confident footsteps suddenly paused. The moment they did, he could almost feel the disdain coagulate into a solid form, wanting nothing more than to hammer him down into a bloody paste. It was clear they believed his heart was shaken by their display. At the head of the room, City Lord Loom sat, but his position was actually shared of equal height with another. This man seemed older than the City Lord, but their looks were similar to the point of almost seeming like twins. It was obvious that they were related, brothers in fact. He was the grandfather of Tei's distant cousin Iria, the second in command of the Loom clan and the highest-ranked Grand Elder. Normally, City Lord Loom would take up position as the ancestor of the clan, but because both he and his brother were amidst a power struggle, this position was left unfilled. If City Lord Loom left his position as patriarch now, with only his granddaughter left in his line, the clan would without a doubt fall to his brother's line. Seeing Ryu's disappointing display, he couldn't help but glance toward a calm and silent young man who Looked like he could have been his own grandson. Had he made a mistake, trusting a stranger? Did it matter if the clan fell into his brother's hands? Grand Elder Loom wasn't anywhere near as powerful as his elder brother. Though he looked older, this was only because his cultivation was weaker. However, he held a great amount of political power. He couldn't match his elder brother in strength of cultivation, but in strength of seed, he lapped his elder brother several times. In truth, this was the city lord's own fault. He insisted on having just one wife, and even after she died, he never took another. He didn't want to burden his wife with giving birth to too many children, so after they had 2 sons, he gave her nothing else but tender affection and care. All the while, his younger brother had 4 wives and dozens of concubines. Over their thousands of years of life, his seed had grasped a firm hold of the clan. In fact, in his youth, the Grand Elder had purposely delayed his cultivation so that having children would be easier. He understood well that the more powerful one's realm, the less likely their seed would take root because children born to parents with high cultivation were blessed with greater talent. These matters led to the current situation. Grand Elder Loom controlled 70% of the clan and Looming City, while the only reason his line had yet to fully take hold was because City Lord Loom was so powerful. The City Lord had had chances remaining with his own sons, but unfortunately they both died. In the end, the only kin he had remaining was his granddaughter, but the core laws of the clan forbade women from holding power. Who knew what the City Lord had done to protect his wife would backfire in such a way? In the end, he placed his trust in Ryu after seeing through some things during his appearance, but now he felt that he had maybe been too rash. Though many here had weak cultivations, there were many paths of cultivation throughout the cosmos. There was no shortage of businessmen and political officials who couldn't hardly harm a fly, but had auras so sharp that even immortals would feel fear. City Lord Loom always hid his sharpness because he had an amiable personality. So to him, Ryu being brave before him was meaningless. The reaction here was really what counted. The calm young man who could have been the City Lord's grandson heard a stifled laugh to his side. It was none other than his sister, Iria. Grandfather Patriarch must have trained this animal a bit too well. He doesn't even dare to bark anymore. The young man remained silent, his eyes still closed as though he had heard none of his sister's laughter. "Are you all right?" Ryu suddenly turned and strode to the entrance of the double doors, his eyes looking down toward the shivering Tay. In that moment Tay was shocked. Her eyes, still reddened, couldn't help but look up toward Ryu. But his usual cold silver eyes were decidedly warmer. Maybe not warm compared to normal individuals, but most definitely warm in comparison to himself. Seeing Tay unable to speak, Ryu scanned her delicate features for a moment. "Sometimes," he said softly, "when one path is blocked, it's possible to find another. When the mountain is too high, climb a small hill. When the ocean is too deep and violent, start with a calm lake." Tay's lips trembled. "Take it one step at a time." She didn't understand why this cold young man who didn't seem to care about anything had come back to comfort her. How could she know that Ryu had this same fear? But its root was within a much grander hall than this one. Back then, he was just 7 years old, but the Tatsuya clan went all out to celebrate his awakening day. Who would have known that the talented Prince Ryu would be nothing but a useless commoner before more eyes than he cared to remember? A mountain taller than even the Protector Shrine fell before him, casting a shadow that blotted out his existence. Those matters had happened in a grand hall just like this one. "It'll show you that it's no big deal," Ryu said with a light smile. "Follow me, don't lose sight of my back." Tay's mind went blank. It was difficult to make out Ryu's features because of his half-mask. Even his hair color was indiscernible, but for some reason, she felt that smile imprint her soul with something unerasable. Ryu turned back and strode forward. The pressure once more bore down, but his steps were unhurried. It was then that a snort left his lips. A violent aura, many times stronger than the Loom clan ministers and elders could believe tore their presence apart. In an instant, several individuals with weak constitutions paled, unable to control their visceral reaction. Iria felt her stifled laughter catch in her throat, while the calm young man finally opened his eyes, their depths reflecting Ryu's careless demeanor. In typical fashion, though, Ryu's mind wasn't on these matters at all. Memories of his father flashed in his mind. These words, weren't they the same his old man had said to him back then? Ryu's eyes became distant, remembering that broad back that protected him. Stay alive, father. Your son will grow strong enough to stand by your side one day. Not for a second did Ryu believe that his father would fall in the nether realm. If his father couldn't survive, then no one could. In but a moment, Ryu had crossed the grand hall, and the faces of city lord and grand elder loom, taking a seat upon a luxurious cushion, slightly to the back right of the patriarch. Tae dazedly followed him, barely comprehending her own actions as she took a seat on a cushion as well this time to Ryu's right. By the time Tae snapped out of her stupor, it was already too late. If she had been in her right state of mind, she would have pulled Ryu to sit where she sat, while she would shift one more cushion over, but in her daze, she completely forgot. She was stunned. Her heart nearly pounded out of her chest, her face flushing completely red. It felt as though her world was simultaneously collapsing and spinning at the same time. How could she make such a stupid mistake? What was she thinking? The seat Ryu had taken was one that hadn't been occupied ever since her father died. It was the seat of the Loom clan's heir. If she wasn't here, maybe it would be an innocent mistake and nothing more. However, her actions were nothing less than a siren of consent. Coupling that with Ryu's untimely intimate care for her feelings just moments ago, and even her unhesitant following of his words, and an explosion of chaos too difficult to control had erupted. Tae suddenly blushed such a deep shade of red that the air around her steamed. She had just announced to the world that Ryu was her fiancé. Brother, Grand Elder Loom was immediately enraged. You married off my grandniece to a man with no name and reputation. Would you really hate to see my grandson take over your mantle this much? He is still your blood. The grand hall became rowdy and a powder keg of emotion erupted. Even the usually calm grandson of the Grand Elder couldn't help but from. Anyone who knew him would understand that he was truly enraged by the sight before him. The problem was the city Lord Loom was just as stunned as everyone else. How could he promise his only kin to the very young man he steeled his heart to kill just days earlier? At first, he too thought it was an innocent mistake, so he was about to lightly correct Ryu's seating position, thinking that his granddaughter would of course sit in the correct place. But who would have known that the usually astute and attentive Tae would make such a big mistake? The individuals here weren't just of the Loom clan. As the manager of a city, the Loom clan had long since expanded to accommodate many small clans, especially with how large the city was. There were a few fourth-order clans under their wing and even more third-order clans, each of whom were allocated a certain number of seats, depending on their strength within their grand hall. Since these people had hitched their wagons to the Loom clan, they also had a vested interest in seeing them succeed in the coming selection. If the Loom clan could become a half-step sixth-order clan, their positions would rise as well. For this reason, many favored the talented Matthias Loom. He hid himself deeply, but his demeanor was clear to everyone. They were all aware that this generation of core clan heirs was very weak. Even Ryu was aware of this. Or why else would he say that Tae could defeat them all alone? So everyone believed that Matthias was their greatest chance. Yet who would have known that their usually calm, steady and amiable patriarch would suddenly slap all of their wishes in the face like this? Even those who sided with the city lord didn't want to see such a thing happen. This truth made this matter impossible to cover up. By now, Ryu had noticed his own mistake as well. In truth, he had sat here out of muscle memory. He had been thinking about his father when he entered this grand hall. So to him, this place was naturally his own. He lost count of the number of times he had followed his old man's broad back to sit in this very seat. Unfortunately, this time, he wasn't in his Tatsuya clan, nor was the woman by his side Elena. Ryu sighed lightly, his gaze filled with a complicated light. Suddenly his eyes sharpened, the tremendous momentum of the imposed realm wafting from his body. So many petty annoyances, he said coldly. So what if City Lord Loom made this decision without speaking to you first? Is she your daughter? Do you wield as much power as he does? Do you have the right to speak even before me, let alone him? Shut your mouths. The various ministers and elders were stunned. They were so used to dealing with City Lord Loom, an amiable man who took the opinions of everyone into consideration. It wasn't that he was indecisive, but more so that he didn't want to rule like a tyrant. After spending so many years with such a ruler, how could they suddenly become used to such a brazen young man? How would they live life, as they normally did, if he took over the clan? Tay was stunned by Ryu's words before her eyes watered with gratefulness. She lowered her head, looking at her small trembling hands. One might think that, with Ryu's personality, he wouldn't care for Tay's emotions in all of this. But this would be an incredibly shallow analysis. In the past, how had Alina become his fiancée? She suddenly appeared in his bedchambers one day and stripped down until everything was exposed. By then, she had understood Ryu's personality to the tiniest detail. She was certain that this was the man she wanted to be with for the rest of her life. But getting him to accept her was a task taller than even finding him had been in the first place. So that was the plan she came up with. She knew that the cold Ryu was a man who cared for the emotions of those he saw as his own. After becoming the first man to see her naked, there was no doubt in her mind that he would take responsibility. The matters of today seemed like an innocent mistake, but in a martial world where reputation dictated, something as important as the faith of a clan, if Ryu were to ruthlessly deny that Tay was his woman, she would be forever tainted. No matter how good her explanation, there would always be those with nefarious intentions who sought to sink the Loom clan as a whole. Maybe under normal circumstances, this wouldn't be a large problem, but one needed to remember that the Loom clan had somehow made enemies with individuals of the core region. And though Tay hadn't explained how to Ryu back then, with Ryu's intelligence, he immediately picked up that the main cause should have been Tay herself. If this was true, and Tay was suddenly seen happily accepting a man as her fiancé, only for the same man to turn around and say he had no interest in her, it was a stain that would never leave her in this lifetime. In truth, Ryu had no interest in Tay. She was a top-tier beautiful woman, but that was only by the standard of other half-step divine vessel realm women. For Ryu, who had been around women with high cultivations all his life, not to mention xianxia, who was on his shoulder, Tay was only an average beauty. As one took steps toward immortality, the impurities of their body would be washed away, and one would become more perfect, unless one was of a race as perfect as the sprites, or had genes that came from high cultivation realm parents. Like Ryu, it was impossible to be among world-class beauties with low cultivation unless you were an absolute anomaly, likely born with a special bone structure. Still, this was only one aspect. Ryu had never been interested in women simply for their looks, or else he wouldn't have rejected xianxia, who was even more beautiful than Alina when last he saw her. The truth was that he merely had a good impression of this woman and nothing more, compared to the strong-willed Alina, who had always been the support in his life, or his elder adoptive sister, who had always protected him without rest. Tay was simply much too lacking. However, even if he only took Tay as his woman in name, he would do so. He knew that if Alina was here, she would be glaring at him with vicious intent, daring him to reject Tay in front of so many people. If he actually did something so dishonorable, she would never forgive him. His mind was already made up. He would take responsibility for Tay and for his mistake. In the future, when she met a man she could truly love, he wouldn't hesitate to let her go. His heart only had space for one woman. Ryu knew he was being naive. If they'd crucify Tay for such an innocent mistake, how bad would the backlash of leaving him for another man be? However, in Ryu's mind, since he had decided to take Tay as his woman, he would elevate her to the point where the squabbles of this pitiful inner ring could be dealt with by her with a single finger. These people glaring at him with ill intent were nothing more than ants in his eyes. "Didn't I come here for you to test me?" Ryu said coldly. "All I've been subjected to is glaring and the barking of yard dogs. If you want me to fight, Then bring someone out worthy of fighting me. If you have no such intention, then don't speak again. Tae glanced at the side of Ryu's face. She still couldn't see his features clearly, but for some reason it didn't matter. She herself had no feelings for Ryu. He was the exact opposite of the warm and loving husband she had always dreamed of. Yet, after living over 100 years of life herself, somehow he had become the closest that ideal image of any man she had ever met. It was quite an ironic thought. He was in the middle of sneering and talking down to those around him, yet she somehow saw an image of warmth. Who knew what was in that pretty little head of hers? Grand Elder Loom's expression darkened. Brother, we know nothing about this young man. We're not even certain that he is as young as he appears in the first place. To make matters more uncertain, he constantly wears a mask and is a necromancer, a group of individuals you know well that the Zhu clan despises. Even if there were no other factors to worry about, do you believe that the Zhu clan would leave silently if they knew their territory would be inherited by one of their sworn enemies? The grudge between mental masters and necromancers was not a secret. This was something everyone was aware of. Grand Elder Loom didn't need to reach, and his logic was sound. And what exactly do you want me to do? Break my granddaughter's engagement after it was already announced to the world? The city lord's stiff reply left the Grand Elder speechless. He knew his brother well, so he immediately understood that this couldn't have been his original intention. Some mistake had occurred, or this young man enticed my grandniece in some fashion, or he schemed this from the very beginning to weasel out of my brother's rage. In that instant, the Grand Elder's deductions became the deduction of many others. In fact, maybe only Tae was completely aware that Ryu hadn't done this intentionally. Even the city lord felt his vision cloud when he gazed upon Ryu, as though he was trying his best to control his rage. Everyone knew that necromancers had strong mental realms. Currently, Tae had still only opened her spiritual pulse. This wasn't an odd sight, because it took so long to complete one's immortal ring. Those who weren't focused on their mental realm didn't attempt to open their spiritual vessel until after entering the divine vessel realm. Some even waited until the connecting heaven realm, making Tae absent-minded for a moment. Just enough for her to sit in the wrong place was as easy as flipping over a hand for someone with as deep a mental realm as Ryu. In truth, Ryu's mental realm was currently even stronger than even the city lord himself. This was why the city lord couldn't be certain that he would have detected Ryu's underhanded tricks or not. Ryu, however, under the scrutiny of so many individuals, hardly reacted. He didn't particularly care that his good intentions were being taken for some sort of dark scheme. In fact, he preferred it this way. This mistake of his had suddenly made it difficult for him to find a path toward revenge in the future. He couldn't very well harm the grandfather of a woman he now had to responsibility for, right? However, if this city lord believed he had ill intentions, at least it would be a sort of psychological revenge. What Ryu was more annoyed by was that his time was being wasted. He had already made his goal of accepting all challengers clear, yet these old fools were still speaking nonsense. For him, every second was precious. Wasting hours away like this was something he had never done. Then ill battle him if that's what he wants. A calm voice cut through the silence. Many already knew its owner, but couldn't help but look over to see Matthias slowly rising from Iria's side. Unlike Ryu and Tae, who sat front and center, Matthias could only sit to the side in a slightly respected position. This was the fate of a youth without claim to heirship. Stop. City Lord Loom finally collected his emotions enough to speak calmly. At his words, though Matthias still continued to stand, he didn't continue forward for the time being. You all have been under my rule for too long to believe me to be an incompetent ruler. All ministers and elders, regardless of the side they were on, couldn't help but nod. There was a faint struggle between both sides, but it never crossed over a line. In the end, though Grand Elder Loom was ambitious, he still treated the city lord as his elder brother. When he heard that City Lord Loom had chosen a stranger over his own grandnephew, he had felt more hurt than rage. Little Matthias is very talented, but there will always be higher mountains and deeper seas in this world. The reason I called this meeting wasn't to have Ryu fight. It was to make you all aware of his identity. This young man is a working disciple of the mercenary guild. The atmosphere was suddenly frozen solid. Ryu finally understood why it was that the city lord trusted him with such an important task. It seemed that the ring on his finger was a form of status as well. However, the city lord's judgment was still lacking. Ryu wasn't a working disciple. He was a core disciple. The disciple rankings were known by all. The lowest working disciple, then the outer, inner, and finally core disciples. Above that there were the inheritors, and even above that there was the unrestrained throne disciple. By receiving the ring on his finger, Ryu had the minimum status of working disciple. But what City Lord Loom didn't know was that Ryu had been accepted into a Sky Gods faction, thus making him a core disciple at a minimum. Clearly, he didn't have enough insight or knowledge to see through this. Still, one only needs to see just how shocked those in this grand hall were to know that even a working disciple of such a massive guild could not be looked down upon. In fact, even the calm Matthias had a slightly more serious expression on his face. It was no wonder the city lord was respectful of Ryu's talent, but not to the point of being unwilling to kill him. Working disciples wouldn't receive any sort of protection from the mercenary guild. In fact, the nature of the mercenary guild itself meant that even core disciples might not be protected. However, just as everyone was shocked, they couldn't have possibly guessed Ryu's next words. It seems you've not only underestimated me, but also your own grandnephew. Ryu casually rose from his seated position, meeting Matthias in the center space of the grand hall. City Lord Loom frowned. Underestimated. Could it be that his judgment was wrong? He took another look at the ring on Ryu's finger, but no matter how he tried, he couldn't seem to see through it. It was veiled by a thin sheen of mystery. Could it be that his status in the Necromancer Guild is even higher? Unfortunately, all of his thoughts frozen when a blazing phenomenon erupted within the Loom Grand Hall. Raging golden winds spiraled as the two men faced, wrapping them in a cyclone of essence that seemed willing to tear the whole of the hall from its very foundations. In that moment, two majestic thrones appeared above them both. Though decorated differently, they each had a gorgeous air to them that could stall one's heart. Ryu's came with a cold wind, pulsing with a gentle pale blue light that was almost white. It was embroidered in sapphire and diamonds, before being finished in a beautiful silver. Matthias had a darker, yet somehow bright presence, dotted with rubies and black diamonds. It was finished with a gorgeous Damascus steel, unbridled and arrogant. Throne Ryu. Matthias' calm voice spread through the grand hall. A cold reply came from Ryu. Throne Matthias. The pedestal plane once only had two thrones, both of whom resided within the core region. A third didn't appear until Ryu conquered the Awoken Moon Sex trial. However, Ryu had a feeling that Matthias wasn't any one of those two. This throne, matching Ryu's own in aura, had to be from an 8th order sect or clan at a minimum, while the two thrones of the core region could only have a 6th order throne at best. Though the Awoken Moon Sect's throne should have been of the 9th order, how could it not weaken after all? Their descendants had been through, so though it was meant to be a 9th order throne, its aura was only of the peak 8th order. The question was then, just where had this Matthias gone? Which mighty 8th order sect did he claim the throne of? Bonus chapter. For 200 golden tickets, City Lord Loom was frozen in shock. Maybe if it was just Ryu who turned out to be a throne, it would be all right. But he was even more shocked by his own grandnephew. He had such a talent in his clan, and he wasn't even aware. Unlike Ryu and Matthias, he couldn't see through the strength of the thrones in any detail. However, he didn't need to understand the shocking reality of it all. Thrones represented the peak talents of the martial world. Though not all peak talents would be thrones, there was no such thing as a talentless throne. City Lord Loom felt a deep sense of regret in an instant. He had gone so far to pull Ryu to his side, even crossing his own moral code, when these matters could have ended by relying on his grandnephew. Brother, the Loom clan patriarch looked toward his younger brother. Why didn't you tell me? But in that moment, he saw an expression on the Grand Elder's face that surprised him. Grand Elder Loom was actually shocked by Matthias' display. Clearly, he hadn't been aware either. It seems the heavens wanted to play a joke on us. Grand Elder Loom laughed bitterly. If little Matthias hid this from us all, he had to have a reason to do so. You aren't a match for me, Matthias said lightly. It wasn't that he wanted to ignore his grandfather's words, but rather that Grand Elder Loom was correct. He obviously had his reasons for keeping this a secret. I'm aware, Ryu said without much reluctance, but the gap may not be as large as you believe. Ryu's response actually made the calm Matthias smile. A worthy throne, indeed. Ryu didn't feel much grief, but that didn't mean he wasn't inwardly burning. Even though Matthias was several decades older than him, with the so-called martial gods that arrogantly took over his shrine playing stop aging just for him. Any loss was frustrating to him, even when it was at the hands of figures like City Lord Loom. However, he had learned to ignore that fire in his belly and aim his ire toward improvement, just like he had for the crystalline jade's 4th floor. Ryu could easily see through Matthias' cultivation. He was a half-step connecting heaven realm expert, judging by his vitality. Though he was older than 100 years old, he wasn't quite 200 years old either. To put this into perspective, if born on the Blossom Plane, a step above this pedestal plane, Matthias would be adored as a heaven-shaking genius. Even on the Shrine Plane, though he wouldn't be among the very best, not many would dare to offend him. Yet this young man was born in this mere inner ring. To say his accomplishments were impressive was understating it. In truth, Ryu wasn't completely helpless against Matthias. If he used his 3 imposed realm comprehensions, he could battle anyone within the 5th order rank of strength. The issue was that, as a throne, Matthias' combat prowess was several levels above normal individuals. If Ryu could battle above his cultivation, why couldn't Matthias do so as well? But this was only a surface issue. The true reason Ryu knew he didn't stand much a chance was because I didn't expect to meet a fellow necromancer on one of my rare trips back home. But why do I feel like you aren't much of a necromancer at all? Matthias said lightly. In that moment, everyone understood. The sinister dark aura around his throne, his need for secrecy, it all made sense. How could he expose his ties to the Necromancer Guild, while his clan resided within Zhu clan territory? The only reason he revealed this now was because it seemed that without him, his clan had ironically been pushed to the point of recruiting another necromancer. It seemed he had been too low-key, but it was surprising that this necromancer happened to be a young man no less talented than himself. Ryu didn't respond. Instead, 2 shadows suddenly manifested before him. 5th Order corpse puppets, and they're both of the peak Dao realm. The elders and ministers felt a stifling aura they couldn't ignore. They found themselves not unable to look away from the corpse puppets themselves, but rather the weapons in their hands. They both wielded a glaive, and though they had yet to brandish it, a bloodthirsty domain seemed to whip around them, eager for battle. Each had a beautiful violet finish, and radiated the aura of an earth-grade weapon. It seemed after months of training, Ryu's silver-thirsting ore had taken a step forward while the new moon, or of their weapon bodies shone with vigor. Matthias, though, hardly reacted to this change. Even half a year ago, Ryu's mental realm had already been strong enough to support a 6th Order corpse puppet. The issue was that finding this corpse puppet was next to impossible. Connecting heaven realm corpses wouldn't just lay around waiting to be picked. However, even if this was a limiter for Ryu, would it be for Matthias? The reason why Ryu knew his chances were slim was because he was certain that Matthias had at least one 6th Order corpse puppet. It's as expected. Your grave Kai is not bad, but you have no death heir comprehension. The aura of your weapons far exceeds that of your corpses. You'll never be able to bring out the true strength of your corpse puppets in this way. Why do you insist on being a necromancer? Ryu's gaze didn't leave Matthias, but he didn't answer either. Seeing that Ryu didn't answer, Matthias didn't press the issue either. There really is no need for us to fight. There's no problem with the both of us representing my Loom clan, As things stand now, it's already impossible to retract some things. Tay avoided her cousin's gaze, still unable to look up from her own hands. I can also guarantee, granduncle, that Ryu didn't use any underhanded means. For now, my mental realm is still stronger than his. Hearing these words, though the city lord breathed a sigh of relief, his feelings only became more complicated. This young man was truly too arrogant. Couldn't he have explained this to him before? But, seeing Ryu's throne, he really did have the capital to be arrogant. It was no wonder why he never tried to rely on his status. What self-respecting throne ever would? With you by my side, Ryu, hiding my strength will be more convenient. I'm still not yet strong enough to go against the Zhu clan, so I must continue to bide my time. As for those here, Matthias' aura suddenly surged. Before anyone could react, dozens of heads flew to the ceiling, washing the grand hall in blood. They couldn't understand how Matthias had done it, but a deep fear was suddenly etched into the hearts of the ministers and elders here. Those who seek benefits from my Loom clan, but are traitors at heart, only have one path. Matthias said coldly. This fight is no longer about this selection. Ryu said without much emotion. I see. Matthias scanned Ryu's visage. A moment later, his spatial ring flashed, revealing his own half-mask. It calmly attached to his face, shrouding Matthias in a mysterious light. You must know this, but a fight between thrones is the best way to snatch faith. Though you won't lose your throne, it may very well drop a grade. I too am eager to raise my throne to the 9th order, but I didn't want to take advantage of our age gap. But since you insist, ill oblige. A cyclone of shadows suddenly appeared before Matthias. Though it was only one, Ryu felt that his two corpse puppets couldn't hold a candle to it. Corpse world. Ryu's eyes narrowed. One of the abilities of someone who had comprehended a death inheritance was the ability to form their own world of death. This world made it much more convenient to summon and unsummon corpse puppets, whereas Ryu had to touch his undead to place them back into his spatial ring. Matthias had no need to do so. He could easily switch them in and out as he pleased. However, this was only one of the benefits of forming a corpse world. A moment later, Matthias' corpse puppet appeared, shimmering in a silver black. However, it wasn't a human corpse puppet, but rather a beast. It had the strong, sturdy shape of a platinum-armored armadillo. Its body was 5 meters long, and a silver armor extended from its nose, down the length of its back and through its wide, 2-meter-long flat tail. Black shadows wafted from its joints, forcing the air around it to tremble. He's a refinement necromancer of the armored beast sub-branch. Ryu felt his heartbeat steady. This corpse, it was of the half-step 6th order. My apologies, but this is already the weakest corpse puppet I can bring out. If you can defeat it with your own, I will withdraw from this battle. Matthias' calm voice filled the bloodied grand hall. Ryu didn't wait any longer. Without hesitation, his 2 5th-order corpse puppets surged forward, weaving in and out of each other as they crossed a 100-meter gap in an instant. Feeling a headache coming on, City Lord Loom could only do his best to cast a net with his kai, hoping to protect the Grand Hall from the impending battle. Matthias calmly gazed at this attack. He felt a bit of praise toward Ryu for hiding the abilities of his corpse puppets so well, but that was about it. He had thought that Ryu was a novice, but it seemed that even that was putting it too nicely. With a flash of his eye, the armored beast slammed its tail downward, causing a scene the ministers and elders watching could hardly believe. Without so much as touching the armored beast, Ryu's corpse puppets stumbled and fell. They tried to regain their balance, but a second tail slam ended whatever hope of that there was. To an untrained eye, it seemed that there was nothing wrong with Ryu's corpse control, but Matthias didn't have an untrained eye. He could immediately sense that Ryu lacked experience. When a human learned to walk or run, at a certain point in their lives it would become nothing more than a reflex. However, when you were a child, stumbling and falling over was a common occurrence. Unfortunately, Ryu was very clearly still at this stumbling stage. His corpses appeared to have a steady gait and stride, but in Matthias' eyes, they were all over the place. Even a decently strong wind could blow them over. A stifled laughter blew through the grand hall. It wasn't malicious, but an unconscious reaction. How could one not laugh when, in one moment, they were waiting in keen anticipation for a battle between two thrones, and in the next moment, they were watching one stumble around like a bumbling fool? Ryu's expression didn't change. It was just as expressionless as before. But Ailsa was laughing so hard on his shoulder that she nearly fell off a few times. Haha, this is too much. One delicate hand draped over her toned belly, while the other formed a fist that repeatedly hit Ryu's shoulder. She really couldn't control herself. Honestly, she couldn't wait. One day, when Ryu reached a level so lofty that few dared to even meet his eye, she'd proudly tell them of. The day he was so inept that his corpse puppet's skirt and legs flipped up and over their heads. Third, perspective activated to its utmost focus had already allowed him to slip into the first state of meditation. My control is too rigid. I'm using 700% more strength just to run than I should. If it wasn't for the City Lord's Kai net, every step these two corpse puppets took would leave a massive imprint in the ground. Matthias wanted to speak, but Ryu corpse puppets had already begun to struggle to stand. Watching this scene, Ailsa burst into a greater fit of laughter. Ryu had only trained for a little over a single month in controlling corpse puppets, but his current abilities only allowed fluid movement from positions he was familiar with. Because his corpse puppets stumbled and fell, they had fallen into a random position he had yet to see as a result. Their attempt to stand was akin to a newborn deer learning to walk for the first time. In truth, with Ryu's talent, a month should have been enough for him to be far more competent than he was currently. The issue was that his starting point was too high. His first corpse puppets were of the fourth order, but he had hardly spent time learning to control them. Instead, he used simply commands for them. To make a long story short, the more powerful a corpse puppet, the more difficult it was to finally control. Ryu was essentially trying to lift a weight far too heavy for himself, all while trying to raise and lower it at a steady, unhurried and controlled pace. Such a thing was impossible, even for him. Eventually, Ryu's two corpse puppets stood and ran forward once more. This time, they leaped slightly into the air to avoid Matthias' tail slam, but another was ready and waiting for them as soon as they landed. Divine Vessel Realm experts should be able to fly, but Ryu couldn't even control their gait properly. How would he fine-tune the circulation of their Kai to allow controlled flight? To make matters worse, his connection with his corpse puppets was muddled. Because he had yet to comprehend a death inheritance, he was relying on grave Kai to form a connection. But it was common knowledge among necromancers that a connection formed with the former was far better. At some point, it became too difficult for many to watch on any longer. They felt too uncomfortable watching Ryu force his corpse puppets to stand again and again. Hours ticked by, and Matthias began to realize that Ryu wasn't the type of person who cared for his face. Anyone else would have fled in embarrassment by now. He had even lost count of the number of times his little sister had heckled Ryu to give up and stop overestimating himself. But Ryu didn't even bat an eye. Still, Matthias could see it very clearly. Ryu never seemed to make the same mistake twice, and his control was becoming more and more refined with each passing moment. By the fifth hour, Matthias could no longer make Ryu's corpse puppets stumble with a mere tail slam, and could only engage directly. But when he did, he learned just how formidable and deep Ryu's glaive comprehension was. If his walking could be compared to a newborn calf, the strikes of his glaive were so precise that even the City Lord felt a shiver down his spine. He couldn't understand just why this was. Could this Ryu really be more familiar with swinging a glaive than he was with walking and running? How could such a thing even be possible? Still, the end result didn't change. Though Ryu improved, his control was still too clumsy and unrefined. So, though his strikes were powerful, he couldn't position his corpse puppets properly to allow himself to take advantage. This results in his corpse puppets being beaten away more times than he could consciously count. That's enough, Matthias said lightly after countless hours. Your grave Kai has run out. There's no point in continuing. This was yet another disadvantage of not comprehending a death inheritance. One advantage of corpse puppets was meant to be their near limitless stamina, Yet Ryu could fight himself for longer than his corpse puppet could. Things weren't meant to be this way. Ryu nodded faintly and walked forward, touching the shoulders of his two corpse puppets. They disappeared into his spatial ring, but his gait didn't stop as he walked by Matthias. He had already exited the grand hall before Tei realized what was happening and subconsciously chased after him. The city lord wanted to stop his granddaughter, but she was already out of his grasp before he could react. Today's matters had been too much of a blow to him. Thanks. These were the only words Ryu said from start to finish, but they resounded through the grand hall. Grandnephew, it seems your granduncle has made a mistake. The city lord sighed before finally speaking these words. Matthias shook his head. Granduncle's judgment wasn't wrong. You saw for yourself that he too is a throne. Iria snorted in disdain. What kind of throne can't even put up a fight? Learn to control your lips, little girl. This isn't a place you can speak. Seeing her grandfather's glare, Iria shrunk back but still harumphed. You're sure there aren't some underlying reasons for this? The city lord couldn't help but imply that Ryu's status was some sort of fluke. Even if he lost, he shouldn't have lost so miserably. Isn't it obvious? Matthias said with a shrug. He isn't a necromancer, well. Not yet anyway. Silence filled the grand hall. Matthias hardly cared though. Instead he was lamenting his cheap labor. He helped that man train for more than half a day, yet he didn't even get faith for it. It seemed the heavens hadn't recognized their battle. How lamentable. Ryu sat in his courtyard, without a care, having entered a deep state of meditation. In fact, he had even swallowed 2 silver vein petals, bringing his state to the breath of world stage. To others, a training session like that was only useful in the moment, but to Ryu, who had focused the spirit-seeking lilies and the origin flame, he could return to that moment in even greater detail than he had when he lived it the first time. Every single instant of moment, every mistake, every one of Matthias' actions and inactions were replayed in his mind to the utmost perfection. In the state of breath of world, it was as though Ryu's breathing was in sync with the very ground he sat upon. The grass moved with the beating of his heart, the soils vibrated with the motion of his kai, and the skies above seemed to shine light only for his usage. Tei, who had run after Ryu, had been left behind long ago. Ryu had been more focused on entering this state than dealing with her, so she had no chance of keeping up with his speed. By the time she caught up, she lost her breath at the sight before her. She didn't know what state of mediation Ryu had entered, but she could instinctively feel that it wasn't as simple as the very first meditation state. It was at the very least breath of earth. She silently berated herself. If she had known he had entered such a rare state, she would have never barged in such an exasperated fashion. Now, she didn't even dare to move a single inch. She stood frozen just 5 or so meters from Ryu, even to the point of holding her breath. Ailsa giggled lightly. Poor little girl. Such a state might be rare for others, but my little Ryu can enter them whenever he wants. The first-ranked heavenly pupils aren't just for show. Tei couldn't be blamed for this. Even the elders of the shrine plane had been shocked when Ryu entered breath of earth back then, let alone Tei herself. To many, breath of heaven was already a legendary state no one but sky gods could touch upon freely. She had no way of knowing that Ryu could easily enter a state a step above that. In truth, Ryu only needed one spiritual seeking lily petal in order to enter breath of world as he could now enter breath of heaven under his own strength. After being washed over with essence multiple times thanks to reaching the imposed realm, he had now undone 5 seals of his heavenly pupils. However, Ryu knew that the time he could stay in breath of world was proportional to the time he could stay in the state he artificially reached it from. So, since he could now stay in breath of earth for about half a day, it was better to enter from that state than breath of heaven, which he could only enter for a few minutes currently. Though Ailsa felt a faint pity for Tei's ignorance, she couldn't very expose herself to a near stranger. Plus, Tei was still a half-step divine vessel realm expert at the end of the day. Standing still and not breathing even for several days wouldn't be difficult for her. In truth, she had a pettier reason. Tei managed to become her little Ryu's woman on accident. Why couldn't it have been her who sat on the wrong cushion? Like this, half a day ticked by, and the moon currently hung high in the sky. Ryu's eyes flashed open, but as though he didn't Tae, his two fifth-order corpse puppets appeared. They instantly began to battle one another under Ryu's control. At first it's slow and deliberate, but as time went on, they quickly reached the realm of true divine vessel realm experts. Their clashes rang outward for several kilometers, filling the bustling night life of Looming City with trepidation. Yet they continued to move quicker, lower fifth order, middle fifth order, higher fifth order. Eventually, even Tae could no longer keep up with their movements. She fled backward, knowing that if she stayed too close, she would get hurt. A moment later, they reached their true fighting prowess, peak fifth order. City Lord Loom, as well as the many experts of the Loom clan, rushed over, thinking that someone had actually had the audacity to attack their clan. But when they unceremoniously surged into Ryu's courtyard, the sight they saw made their hearts tremble. Could it be he had just been pretending before? Ailsa beamed with pride. This was why, even though the mysteries of heaven and earth pupils were looked down upon when they first appeared, they now stood without contest in first place, the undisputed, very best heavenly pupils in existence. During his entire battle with Matthias, Ryu had entered the first state of meditation, the meditation state. But that was only so that he could spur on his third perspective to the highest degree. He scanned the battlefield from every angle and down to every detail, uncaring for his face or embarrassment. Then he relied on focus too, and the origin flamed to benefit from each and every one of those minor details. Everything from start to finish was burned into his mind. He realized then exactly where he had gone wrong in the first month. He spent training with his corpse puppets. How could he learn to manipulate in battle if he had only practiced manipulating them outside of battle? Soon, the battle prowess of Ryu's corpse puppets grew another level, glaives appearing in each one of their hands. Ryu's comprehension was suddenly infused with each one of their actions. They danced a beautiful dance, the silvery moonlight reflecting the dark violet of the bodies of their weapons. Boom! Their weapons came to a deadly stop, each glaive blade resting on the other's neck. This isn't good enough, Ryu said, unsatisfied. Of course, I can easily react now because I don't have the ability to split my mind. Scheming against oneself is impossible if you know what is going to happen. I need to train more. Ryu's frown spoke volumes more than his word. He had the corpse puppets come back to him and enter his spatial ring. This seemed depressing, but Ryu clearly knew his limits. For one, his corpse puppets were still only able to fight on the ground. He didn't fight Matthias in the sky, so he had no information to review in such a situation. In addition, he himself wasn't a spiritual severing realm expert yet, so he couldn't fly in earnest. Thus he had no experience in the matter. These were very tangible reasons to be unsatisfied. So Ryu didn't believe himself to be asking for too much, even if others did. Looking up, Ryu realized there were many individuals here. When is the selection happening? In another half-month, City Lord Loom said after clearing his throat. All right, you all can go back now, Ryu said casually. Hold on, not you. Ryu stopped Tae from leaving, causing her to blush furiously. Ryu, TT, this isn't appropriate. My heart isn't ready. She answered in a flustered manner. Ryu ignored her words. Why haven't you all left yet? I have some things to say to my woman. Tae only wanted to find a place to bury her head, but the only viable option seemed to be Ryu's broad chest. Even if she was 100 times bolder, she would never use it. City Lord Loom glared at Ryu, but seeing his unperturbed eyes, there wasn't anything he could do. This kid is definitely doing this on purpose to get back at me. He dares use my granddaughter as a toy for revenge. In the end, he stormed away. Even if he hated Ryu, he didn't believe he would make his granddaughter a woman this night. He somehow felt that he had a good understanding of this young man. Soon, only Ryu and Tae were left in the courtyard. What is your name? Ryu finally spoke after Ailsa put up a barrier. Timidly looking up at Ryu, Tae suddenly felt a small bit of anger spark. Stamping her feet into the green grass below her, she resolutely glared at him. regaining her composure. She was the intelligent and calm beauty even geniuses of the core region lusted after. Damn it, she wouldn't lose to this unfeeling ice prince. My name is Taedra Loom. Ryu nodded. My name is Ryu Tatsuya. An unceasing pressure crashed into Tae's chest. She had been ready to shrug it off. She already knew his name was Ryu, and that he was nameless. Unlike him, she actually remembered the names of others. But when those words landed on her ears, she could only uncontrollably shiver. The feeling only became more intense after Ryu took off his mask to reveal the most handsome man she had ever seen in her life. She simply couldn't comprehend how a single man could seem to have such delicate features, yet appear to manly and fierce at the same time. You don't know what this name means now, but it is very likely that there will come a day in the future when the whole of the shrine realm remembers my clan's name. Tae's trembling only became worse. Shrine realm. Was he referring to another realm she didn't know about? But why does it feel like he's talking about this one? I am telling you this not because I trust you, but because there isn't much you can do with this information anyway. You don't have the proper connections to make use of it, and even if you did by, say, relying on throne, Matthias, I would be long gone anyway. In truth, thanks to the mercenary guild, Ryu was no longer in a state where he had to stay in the shrine realm. He could travel, go elsewhere, grow, and one day come back for his revenge. He had even solicited the interest of the armament guild, so his options were open. In his mind, though, he didn't want to leave just yet. He yearned to let those bastards know, to tell them that he, Ryu Tatsuya, was back. He wanted them to feel their hearts seize with trepidation and anxiety, for them to feel regret and remorse. It was an impulse he found hard to control, especially when he thought that this news might reach Alina's ears. But for now, he held it in. Even if you are my woman only in name, I must take responsibility for you. If you one day fall in love with the man you are truly meant to be with, you can act as you please. I want you to know that I have a woman that I love, the only woman in my heart, my one and only wife. I will not abandon her. Tae was stunned by these words, but she didn't feel anything special. Aside from a bit of pity, there was nothing more. Who wouldn't feel a small bit of something when rejected so definitely, even if you had no feelings for the other person? But it was nothing so deep as to be emotionally scarring. The two of them had barely interacted. Even if she didn't truly know what love was, she knew enough to know that she wasn't in love with Ryu. In truth, she didn't think Ryu knew what it was either. Unfortunately for her, the Ryu she thought was only 18 years old had already lived for more than 1,000. However, that very woman would hate me if I simply left you like this, so I will help you. Ryu couldn't help but smile at the thought of this woman. It was the kind of smile that made Tae's heart seize and caused a wave of uncontrollable jealousy to overwhelm her. However, she couldn't tell by this smile that there was nothing she could do to change Ryu's mind, and entering his heart was even more impossible. Still, that night, a whole new world would be open to Tae. Welcome clans of the Inner Ring. The meeting ground for the selection occurred in quite an odd location. The various 5th and half-step 6th order clans all gathered in an area of defense forest. In fact, it was clear that even the relatively small clearing they all stood within was only recently cut down. Behind the speaker stood a mountain. However, this so-called mountain was more reminiscent of a hill than anything else. This wasn't because of its lack of size, because it still stretched several kilometers into the sky, but rather because what should have been a rocky surface was drowned in greenery and foliage. This place was filled with powerful vital energy, allowing regular plants and spiritual herbs to grow tens of times faster than normally. As a result, this clearing they stood in had to be mowed down every time the selection was held. Of course, this was one of the holy cultivation lands of the Inner Ring, and was jointly controlled by the 5 core clans. It was known as Mortal Kai Mountain, because its massive structures housed the densest population of Mortal Kai stones in the entirety of the pedestal plane. Though this clearing was relatively small, this was only in proportion to the forest itself and the mountain ahead. It was still capable of holding several hundred people, as it did currently. Geniuses of the inner ring and their clan elders stood at the forefront, but there were also lesser youths who held the hope of the weaker fourth and third-order clans as well. As for the speaker, he was a liaison of the core region, sent to oversee these matters. Interestingly enough, he didn't seem arrogant but was rather warm and inviting, happily greeting them all. It was impossible to tell whether this was his true self, or if he was feigning it for some hidden purpose. As you all know, the selection isn't meant to be held this year, but has been moved forward because your Zhu clan has grasped enough strength. It will soon make its move to the core region. Let this be a motivation to you all. With enough investment into the younger generations, your clans can rise to this height as well. The speaker smiled. Since he was on the older side, his wrinkles truly made him look like a caring grandfather looking after them all. Now I'll explain the process. Listen carefully. You are all already aware, but Mortal Kai Mountain is home to a small realm of the inner ring. To the outside world, it is Mortal Kai Mountain itself that is the home of the densest deposit of Mortal Kai stones. But the reality is that this mountain doesn't hold a candle to the small realm it houses. Each of your clans may nominate 3 individuals to enter the Mortal Kai small realm on the behalf of our elder generation. Within the small realm, there will be various tasks to complete, each of which will reward a certain point total. In order to qualify for the final elimination event, you must rank top 4 in point total. Of course, this ranking excludes the 5 core clan, minus the Zhu clan which won't participate. Should you be among the clans in this final 4, you will be able to enter the elimination event along with the 4 remaining core clans. Unfortunately, these matters won't be simple after this. The atmosphere grew slightly tense. City Lord Loom's brows furrowed. He had expected them to change the rules, but hadn't expected it to be so brazen. Even without the speaker finishing, he knew what was coming. Normally, the rankings as decided by the final elimination round would decide percentage profit from the Mortal Kai Mountain. However, with 1 core clan leaving your region, it will be a bit different. The inner ring must stay harmonious and without conflict so that it can continue to play its important role for the pedestal plane. As such, receiving 5th place will not be enough to claim the Zhu clan's place among the 5 core clans. City Lord Loom clenched his fists, but restrained his aura in the end. Seeing such a man being stifled, some felt pity, but many more felt disdain. In particular, a sharp-eyed young man with brown-amber hair sneered toward the Loom clan's representatives. Earlier, when he had seen Ryu standing by Tae, he had already felt uncomfortable. If his senior brother heard about this, his rage would level a mountain. But in the end, he calmed down. Did it matter what the Loom clan did now? They were at the end of their rope. In order to take over the Zhu clan's territory, one must have the approval of a majority of the clans ranked above you. Meaning, if you rank 5th, should 2 of the clans above you disagree with your placement into the core clans, you will be rejected, and 6th place will be tested. Should you rank 2nd, your fate will be in the hands of the 1 clan above you. Ryu inwardly sneered. What arrogant rules! Hearing this, even City Lord Loom, who had been ready to blow his top, suddenly calmed down and smiled. He had 2 thrones on his side. Would there be an issue taking 1st place? Ah yes, there's something I've forgotten to mention. The old man touched his forehead as though lamenting his old age. Usually, the selection is restricted to those below the connecting heaven realm. However, this is quite a special case, as we are now selecting a new core clan. As you all know, the main backbone of the core clans of the inner ring is, in fact, 6th order experts. City Lord Loom's smile froze, even as Ryu's sneer intensified. Still, changing the rules so abruptly would be too jarring, so we've come to a compromise. Connecting heaven realm experts will be allowed to participate, but they mustn't be over 500 years old. We believe that this would be the perfect balance of younger generation to powerhouses. In an instant, the elders of the Loom clan suddenly turned ashen. Their clan didn't have a single connecting heaven realm expert younger than 500 years old. The worst part about it was that City Lord's senses suddenly picked up several youths who had been previously hiding their auras that no longer bothered to do so. Not only were some of these youths by the side of the 4 remaining core clans, the Bastille clan, the Zai clan, the Vin clan, and the Croft clan, there were also some by the rival 5th Order clans of the Loom clan. City Lord Loom suddenly realized that even making it to the elimination round might be impossible. Bonus chapter for 250 golden tickets. You will stay here, Ryu said with a cold tone one could hardly respond to. But Tae felt quite indignant. Her relationship with Ryu had grown closer, but it had changed into more of a master and disciple connection. Over the last half-month, she had become extremely grateful toward Ryu and his help, and even a bit overwhelmed by the resources he gave her. How could she, a member of a clan of the Inner Ring, ever imagine one day having a 6-star cultivation technique in the palm of her hands? Yet now she could proudly say such a thing. A few days ago, with Ryu's support, Tae had been able to stand up to her grandfather and demand to take the 3rd and final spot their clan was allocated. Seeing his granddaughter sweep through the geniuses of the Loom clan, the city lord felt conflicted, but only let go in the end. Of course, this wasn't because Tae's power had so suddenly skyrocketed in the last few days. If anything, she was actually a bit weaker than she had been due to the fact she needed to rebuild her foundation with a new technique. However, it was exactly because of this reason Ryu stopped her from participating. I can't protect you, so it's best you stay here. Ryu cut her off. Though he didn't say it, he was quite aware that it would be difficult to even protect himself. The difference between the connecting heaven realm and Ryu's current Kai refinement realm was too large. Luckily, his body had reached the depths of the divine vessel realm, despite still being in the pulse tempering realm, so he had a small degree of confidence in at least being able to protect his life. Unfortunately, though, he was still keenly aware of the danger. The truth was that the difference between him and geniuses of the core region should have been large. After all, he practiced 3 6-star cultivation techniques. Still, the matter wasn't so simple. One had to remember that cultivation techniques had 3 distinct stages: the mortal Kai stage, the immortal Kai stage, and the cosmic Kai stage. A weak plane like the pedestal plane couldn't possibly have 6-star immortal and cosmic Kai cultivation techniques, but was the same true of mortal Kai cultivation techniques. The main issue lied in the fact that the connecting heaven realm still lied within the mortal Kai stage. Essentially, Ryu could very well face geniuses who used 5 and 6-star techniques in this battle. If Ryu had already entered the immortal Kai realms and was facing a pedestal plane genius, he would crush them because their inheritances were too shallow. This was even if they were of a higher cultivation stage. But this simply wasn't the case now. Tae didn't know what to say. She had just started down the path of regaining her confidence, of forging herself into the woman she wanted to be. Yet she hit a brick wall before she could even take a second step. Matthias smiled lightly. It seems I may get to see your true strength very soon. Ryu didn't respond to Matthias' words, but his blood is boiling. When his bloodlines were dormant, it was easy to ignore their influence. But now that he had begun to nurture them, things had changed. At the sight of a seemingly unwinnable battle, his fire dragon blood roared with arrogant disdain. Though Ryu thought this was the reason, Ailsa smiled, knowing he was fooling himself. Was it really his bloodline that was responsible? Or was it her little Ryu himself, who loved this situation so much? She could see Ryu's memories clearly. That day he stepped out of the immortal path, he roared into the skies, eager for the challenge the pedestal plane would bring. Ailsa knew very well that this excitement he was feeling had nothing to do with his bloodlines. You all have 6 months to complete enough tasks and gather the necessary points to reach the top 8. Take hold of this opportunity well. Those of you who perform to a certain standard will be invited to the core region to participate in an even more important selection to enter the Ice Devil Legacy world in just a bit more than 1 year's time. Ryu tuned the old man's words out. He didn't care about receiving such help. He had already planned on entering as a wild card. Plus, he was planning on enraging those core region's clans, even as the old man spoke with that sly smile. Why would he then decide to represent them? in Ryu's opinion, but that was giving them too much of a good thing. He would represent himself. A moment later, Ryu's hand reached out and grasped a light green jade necklace that was thrown to him. His heavenly pupils could easily see the complex formation hidden within, meant to keep track of the legitimacy of his points. Your first challenge is to make it to the mortal Kai small realm. The old man smiled a bit deviously. The selection begins now. Numerous figures flashed forward at once, blazing toward the greenery-covered mountain. Ailsa, Ryu thought faintly. Already on it, Ailsa grinned. Though Ryu's feng shui comprehension was deep, he didn't have the proper tools on hand. However, Ailsa's innate bloodline abilities allowed her to disregard the need for such tools. Why would he run around the mountain like a bumbling fool when he could wait a moment and have Ailsa lead the way? Wait a moment. Ryu held Matthias back. Seeing his questioning gaze, Ryu didn't explain. However, Matthias seemed to feel that he could trust Ryu in this moment. The Loom clan is so grand, but why is it that I feel you don't have a single connecting heaven realm genius? The sharp-eyed young man lamented as though he truly cared, even relying on a mere Kai refinement expert. Is it really so difficult to find good help? Many of the other participants had already made a mad sprint for the mountain. Mortal Kai Mountain spanning hundreds of kilometers. If they didn't rush, maybe the time limit would be up before they even found the ever-moving small realm entrance. However, there were a few confident individuals who acted as though they were on a leisurely walk, hanging behind and staring forward, as though those rushing were nothing but a colony of ants. Oh, little sister Tay, my elder brother thinks of you every day. You know how much he wants you. Just say the word and the Zhu clan's position is yours. The elders of the Loom clan who followed grew agitated, many gritting their teeth, while others seemed incredibly tempted. As Ryu had expected, it really had been something like this that pushed the Loom clan into dire straits. At least it seemed City Lord Loom had a backbone, even if his elders and ministers didn't. I suggest you shut your mouth, Ryu said faintly. There are some things in this world that no one can touch when they belong to another. One of those things is my women. Tay, who was just feeling a stifling pressure, was stunned by Ryu's words, but instantly blushed profusely, hiding her embarrassed expression behind his shoulder. At this point, it wasn't just the sharp-eyed young man who frowned, but even the amiable old man who headed the selection turned his gaze toward Ryu. Do you have any idea who my brother is? The sharp-eyed young man sneered. You have a lot of nerve speaking these words. Ryu didn't respond, but this only man, the young man's sneer deepened. Good, good. Do you dare to tell me your name? The young man's roar shook the very ground he stood upon. Found it, Ailsa suddenly said. Let's go. Ryu's figure almost turned into a mirage, Matthias following swiftly afterward. Fast. This was the foremost thought in the minds of everyone who watched on. You want my name? Ryu's voice covered the forest's landscape as he casually glided by the smiling old man. Those of the pedestal plane know me as Throne Ryu. The sharp-eyed young man and the connecting heaven realm experts around him were stunned. They could have never guessed that the young man they felt was overestimating himself actually had the very same status as the man whose reputation they sought to protect. After a moment, though, the young man's sneer returned. This Throne Ryu must be the new throne of the Outer Ring. But how can the throne of a Fifth Order sect compare to the throne of a Sixth Order clan? Plus, there was another thing that made the young man extremely confident. Thrones were known for their battle prowess, but Ryu was simply far too young. Rumors said that he was only 18 years old, but his elder brother was not only a throne, but was already over 500 years old. The gap between them was akin to heaven and earth. In fact, even the young man himself was confident in defeating Ryu. To have defeated a mighty throne myself. Suddenly he shook his head. No, such a defeat would be too easy. For disrespecting my Lao clan, I'll force you to understand that even a throne is useless before me.